The old man came out of the whiteout with a huge pack on his back, one hand locked around a wooden cane, and snow packed into the seams of his coat. Caleb Mercer had seen men survive impossible nights before, but when his retired canine tapped the floor 3 times, Caleb knew this stranger had not arrived by accident. Snow had been falling over South Lake Tahoe since before noon, thick enough to erase the pines, the road, the woodpile, and finally, the whole honest shape of the world. By midnight, Caleb Mercer could not see the fence posts 10 yards from his porch. The glass in the kitchen window had turned white around the edges, and the old cabin made small, worried sounds under the weight of the storm boards, ticking rafters settling, the stovepipe humming when the wind found the right angle. Caleb stood in front of the wood stove with his sleeves rolled to his elbows, counting the last split logs stacked in the metal rack. 5 pieces of cedar, 2 of pine, 1 crooked chunk of oak that would smoke if he fed it wrong. He knew the count without looking. He had known it for 3 hours, maybe 4, but numbers had always steadied him. Distance to cover, weight to carry, water left in a canteen. Minutes before a man stopped shivering, and the danger changed its name. He rubbed his thumb over the cracked face of the military watch on his wrist, then looked toward the small hallway where his son slept. Eli had left the door open the width of a hand because he pretended he was too old to need light and too young to say he wanted company. 10 years old, brave as a match in a windstorm, and wearing a red sweater so patched at the elbows that it looked like a little flag of surrender. Caleb had told him the sweater still had 1 good winter in it. Eli had looked down at the uneven sleeves and said in the dry little voice he used when he wanted to sound like a grown man, "Maybe half a winter, Dad. On a good behavior plan." Caleb had laughed because the boy deserved laughter in the house. He had laughed even though the bank notice sat folded under the flour tin, even though the pantry held beans, rice, coffee, 2 onions, and a jar of peaches saved for some future day when joy needed proof. Ranger lay by the front door, his sable coat rising and falling in the dim orange light. The old German shepherd had 1 ear perfect and 1 ear torn from a life Caleb did not describe around Eli. His muzzle had gone gray in the last year. So had Caleb's temples. They had earned it together. Ranger's paws twitched now and then, and once he gave a low sigh, not fear, not sleep, simply complaint. The dog hated storms because storms lied. They carried scents the wrong direction, buried tracks, muffled footsteps, and made every branch scrape sound like a hand on a window. Caleb bent and set 1 cedar log into the stove, then shut the iron door with care. No wasted heat, no wasted motion. That rule had followed him out of the teams, across the ocean, through the hospital corridors where Eli learned to walk again, after pneumonia took the strength from his legs for a season, and into this cabin under Granite Bowl, where Hannah's scarves still hung on the hooks by the door, because neither father nor son had found the courage to move them. The wind pressed against the walls. It sounded almost human for a moment. Caleb went still. Ranger lifted his head. Not a bark. Not yet. The dog pointed his nose toward the front door, breathed in, and watched Caleb with the terrible patience of a creature who trusted facts more than hope. Caleb reached for the old pistol on the shelf beside the radio. The radio had been dead since dusk, nothing but static and a faint drifting voice from Reno that came and went like someone talking underwater. He did not like picking up a weapon in a house where his son slept. He liked even less the thought of leaving it there when someone might be outside. Then the sound came again. 3 taps, faint, wood against wood or bone against ice, or maybe only the storm knocking loose a branch from the porch roof. Caleb held his breath. Ranger rose slow and stiff, his nails clicking once on the floor. 3 taps again. Not strong, not steady. Tap, a pause. Tap, another pause. Tap. Eli's bedroom door creaked. "Dad?" Caleb did not turn around. His eyes stayed on the latch. "Stay in your room, bud." "Is it the roof?" "Maybe." "That means no, right?" Caleb almost smiled. The kid could read the spaces between words too well. Ranger moved forward until his nose nearly touched the lower seam of the door. He did not bare his teeth, he did not growl. Instead, he lifted one front paw and set it down on the plank floor, once, twice, 3 times. Caleb's chest tightened. That signal had been born in a place of dust and sun-taught when silence mattered and every sound could give away a life. 3 taps meant there was a living person close by. Not a deer, not a bear, not a branch, a person. Caleb crossed the room and put one hand low palm facing Ranger. The dog froze. Caleb listened. The wind dragged snow along the porch boards with a dry whisper. Somewhere beyond the house, a pine cracked under the burden and fell into the storm with a soft, distant groan. Then a voice came through the door, thin as thread. "Please." Caleb's hand closed around the pistol grip, then loosened. That word did not sound like a trap. It sounded like the last coin in an empty pocket. He slid the iron bar free, lifted the latch, and opened the door only as wide as his shoulder. The storm shoved back like a living thing. Snow burst across his boots. The porch lantern had gone out, but the moon behind the clouds gave just enough pale light to show a figure bent forward beside the steps. An old man stood there, if standing was the word for it. He had one hand clamped around a cane made from pale wood, polished smooth at the grip. His other hand held the strap of a huge canvas backpack that rode high and wrong on his shoulders, swollen with wet and ice, big enough to pull a stronger man backward. Snow covered the brim of his hat. His silver hair stuck in ropes against his temples. His coat had frozen stiff along the hem, and his lips had the bluish cast Caleb had seen before in men who were losing the argument with cold. "My truck," the old man whispered. Road vanished. His knees buckled before he could finish. Caleb moved without thinking, pistol to shelf, both hands under the old man's arms, weight low, drag turn, kicked the door shut. Ranger backed out of the way, then circled in, nose working hard along the man's boots, pant sleeves, the strap of the pack. "Eli blankets," Caleb said. His voice came out calm enough to be useful. The boy appeared in the hallway with eyes wide and hair flattened on one side, but he moved fast. He grabbed the wool blankets from the trunk under the window, the thick ones that still smelled faintly of cedar and Hannah's lavender soap. Caleb cut the backpack straps loose from the old man's shoulders with his pocket knife because the buckles had frozen and the weight was pulling the man's chest tight. The pack hit the floor with a wet thud that shook a spoon off the table. Eli stared at it. "That's bigger than me." "Blankets," Caleb repeated. "Yes, sir." Eli dropped to his knees and helped tuck the first blanket around the old man's legs. Caleb checked the man's breathing, his pulse, his fingers. Cold. Too cold, but alive. There was no room for panic, which was fortunate because Caleb had misplaced his talent for panic years ago. It never came when expected. It came later, in bed, when a branch scratched a wall and became something else in his mind. He stripped off the old man's gloves and boots, working gently but quickly. The socks were soaked. The toes had feeling barely. Ranger pressed close and gave a soft whine. "Not now," Caleb murmured. The dog ignored the tone and lowered himself beside the old man, laying his warm body along the man's hip like a living sandbag. Eli came back with another blanket, then another, then Hannah's faded quilt from the chair. He hesitated with that one. Caleb saw the pause and understood it. Some objects were not cloth. They were rooms inside the heart. "Use it," Caleb said quietly. Eli nodded and laid the quilt over the old man's chest. The old man's eyes fluttered open. They were pale blue cloudy, with cold and age, but not empty. He looked at Caleb, then the boy, then Ranger. "Good dog," he breathed. Ranger thumped his tail once, accepting the diagnosis. Caleb almost laughed again, and that frightened him a little because the house had been too close to despair for laughter to arrive so easily. He filled the kettle from the last clean jug and set it on the stove. The water would take too long. Everything took too long in winter, except losing heat, losing money, losing people. He crouched beside the old man and rubbed warmth back into his hands through a dry towel. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. The old man swallowed. "Arthur." "Arthur what?" The question was habit, but the answer did not come. The old man's gaze slid toward the heavy pack where it lay near the door, leaking melted snow onto the floorboards. His hand twitched under the blanket, reaching. "Leave it," Caleb said. "It's safe." "No." The word was small, but hard. "Not safe. Important." Caleb glanced at Ranger. The dog was watching the pack too, but not with alarm, curiosity. Scent memory. Caleb moved the pack closer to the stove, close enough that Arthur could see it, far enough that the wet canvas would not steam too fast and ruin whatever was inside. As he lifted it, something in the outer pocket shifted, and a small patch caught on the torn seam. Caleb saw only a flash before it slid back, faded tan fabric, a black trident shape, numbers written in marker, and a dark crescent stain that time had turned brown. His hand stopped. The room narrowed. The wind outside fell away. For 1 second he was not in Tahoe. He was looking at sun-white dust on a road a medical convoy stopped, where no convoy should stop, a younger ranger pulling at the leash, Owen Kessler grinning under a helmet, because Owen had grinned at everything right up until the day the world forgot how to give him back. "Dad." Eli's voice came from far away. Caleb set the pack down carefully. Too carefully. Ranger lifted his head and looked at him. The dog knew the change in his breathing before Caleb did. Arthur's fingers closed around the edge of the quilt. "You know it," he whispered. Caleb turned back. "Know what?" It was a bad lie. Everyone in the room heard it fall. Arthur's eyes tried to focus on him. "The men in the snow," he said. "No, not snow. Sand first, then snow. I carried it so I would not forget." Caleb stood too fast and almost knocked the kettle from the stove. Eli flinched, then pretended not to. That hurt more than the memory. Caleb forced his hand flat against the counter. 1 breath. Count 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. He had taught Eli that after the boy woke from fever dreams, never admitting he used the same method for himself. "You need warmth," Caleb said. "Stories can wait." Arthur gave a weak sound that might have been agreement or might have been grief. Caleb poured hot water into a mug, cooled it with a little snow from the clean pan by the door, and helped Arthur sip. The old man coughed, but not badly. Good, better. The house was doing what houses were meant to do, holding life inside while the dark walked around looking for a way in. Eli sat back on his heels, arms wrapped around himself. "Is he going to die?" Children asked the question adults wasted half their strength avoiding. Caleb looked at Arthur, then at Ranger, who had settled his head on the old man's knee, as if making a promise on behalf of them all. "Not tonight," Caleb said. "Not if we do our part." Eli accepted that, not because it was certain, but because it gave him a job. He went to the shelf, took down the small emergency candle and lit it from the stove. "Mom said light helps people find the room again," he said. Caleb's throat closed. Hannah had said that during Eli's worst fever, placing a lamp by the boy's bed, like a lighthouse for a child who kept drifting away. She was right, Caleb managed. Snow slapped the windows, the old cabin groaned and held. Arthur slept in broken pieces through the next hour while Caleb changed the wet towels, warmed the blankets, and checked his pulse. Eli made coffee too weak to offend anyone's nerves and too strong to be called water. Ranger stayed pressed against Arthur, giving up his own comfort with the solemn dedication of an old soldier on watch. Once, near 2 in the morning, Arthur woke and tried again to reach for the pack. Caleb opened the top flap so the man could see inside. There were wrapped bundles, a tin box, a leather notebook swollen at the edges, a folded photograph in a plastic sleeve, and a small drawstring pouch. Not treasure in the usual sense, something heavier. Arthur relaxed only when Caleb buckled it again. "My son," the old man murmured. "He'll come." "Who is your son?" Caleb asked. Arthur's eyelids fluttered. "Preston." Caleb knew the name before the old man said the rest. Everyone around the lake knew Preston Whitcomb, the polished king of alpine development, the man whose company had been buying cabins, access roads, and old family claims from people too tired or too broke to hold out. Whitcomb Alpine Holdings, the letter under Caleb's flour tin. The survey markers he had pulled from his property line 2 weeks ago and stacked on the porch like kindling he refused to burn. Caleb looked toward the folded bank notice hidden in the kitchen. 10 days. Maybe less if the storm delayed the mail, but not the interest. Of course, the old man on his floor belonged to the name trying to take the roof above him. Life had a strange sense of timing. Or God did. Caleb had never been able to decide which one made him angrier. Eli had fallen asleep sitting against the cabinet, chin on his chest, candlelight soft on his face. Caleb lifted him with care and carried him to the hallway. The boy woke enough to tap 3 sleepy fingers against Caleb's shoulder, their little signal. "I am here. Are you here?" Caleb tapped once against Eli's back, then twice. "Always." He laid him in bed and pulled the quilt up. When Caleb returned, Arthur was awake again, watching the ceiling beams as if reading old names there. "You have a boy," Arthur said. "Yes. Then you know." Caleb lowered himself into the chair by the stove. "Know what?" "Why a man walks through weather he should have respected." Caleb looked at the door. Snow had sealed the lower crack. The porch beyond was disappearing by the minute. "You were trying to reach him." "I was trying to stop him," Arthur whispered. Caleb felt the cold of that sentence more than the storm. "Stop him from what?" Arthur's eyes shifted to the pack, then to Caleb's face. In the orange stove glow, the old man suddenly looked less like a lost traveler and more like a messenger who had nearly died before delivering the words. His hand trembled as he lifted it from beneath Hannah's quilt and pointed toward the dark ridge beyond the window, toward the invisible line where Granite Bull rose behind the house. "From building over a debt he does not know he owes," Arthur said. The wind struck the cabin so hard the candle flame bent flat, and Ranger, still lying beside the old man, lifted his paw and tapped the floor 3 times. Morning did not arrive so much as the darkness thinned, turning the windows from black to pewter, while snow kept falling with the quiet stubbornness of something that had made up its mind. Caleb had slept in pieces on the kitchen chair, boots still on, chin dropping to his chest until some small change in the room pulled him awake again. The stove needed feeding. Arthur needed checking. Ranger needed letting out, then toweling off, then told he could not bring half the porch back in on his paws. Eli needed breakfast that looked more confident than it was. That was fatherhood in a storm, Caleb thought, making thin things appear solid. He set the coffee pot on the stove and stirred rice into water with a pinch of salt, calling it porridge because names mattered when supplies got low. Eli shuffled from the hallway, wrapped in a blanket, hair pointing in 3 directions, 1 sock blue and 1 gray. He stopped when he saw Arthur still alive near the hearth. "Good," the boy said, as if he had personally negotiated with heaven overnight and expected his terms to be honored. Caleb placed a finger to his lips. Arthur slept with his head turned toward the pack, his breath rough but steadier than before. Ranger lay between the old man and the door, nose on paws, eyes half open. The dog had not abandoned watch once. "How's our guest?" Eli whispered. "Stubborn." That's a medical word. In this house, yes. Eli nodded gravely and accepted a bowl of rice. He ate without complaint, which told Caleb the boy understood more than he should about what was left in the pantry. Outside, the world had become shapeless. The truck parked beside the shed was a white mound. The split-rail fence had vanished to its top rail. The path to the well house existed only in Caleb's memory. And memory was not enough when snow hid the shallow drainage ditch that could twist an ankle. The power remained out. The radio gave only static and one clear phrase from an emergency broadcast before fading again. Avoid travel. Caleb almost answered it out loud. No kidding. He checked his phone, though he knew there would be no signal. A black screen, 14% battery, no bars. The landline had died during the night, probably under a fallen branch. He should have cut more wood before the storm. He should have repaired the window in Eli's room. He should have called Mara when the first warning came through and asked if she had spare antibiotics for Arthur, spare food, spare anything. The list of should-haves had a way of lining up like men for inspection, each one carrying a little accusation. Caleb put the phone face down. Regret was useless, unless it turned into a task. Arthur stirred near the stove. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharper as they found the ceiling, the stove, the dog, the boy, Caleb. His hand crawled from beneath the quilt and patted the floor until Ranger lifted his head and placed his muzzle under the old man's palm. "Still here," Arthur whispered. "Both of you?" Eli said from the table. "Me too, technically." Arthur turned his head, and a thin smile touched his mouth. "Technically is the finest kind of here." Eli looked pleased with that and returned to his rice. Caleb knelt beside Arthur. "How's your chest? Like a mule sat on it and took offense when asked to move? Any pain when you breathe?" Arthur gave him a look. "At my age, son, breathing and pain have been neighbors for years." Caleb accepted the answer without accepting it. He listened to the old man's lungs as best he could, counted his breaths, checked his fingers. Better color. Still weak, still risky. He needed dry clothes, calories, rest, probably a doctor. They had one of those things, maybe two if the rice held out. "Your last name," Caleb said. Arthur's eyes moved to the pack. "Whitcomb." Eli's spoon paused above the bowl. Even he knew the name. Caleb stood and went to the counter, giving himself something to do with his hands. "Arthur Whitcomb." "Yes." "Preston Whitcomb's father," the old man's silence answered before his mouth did. "Yes." Eli looked from one adult to the other. "The gondola guy," Caleb rinsed a mug that was already clean. "Eat your breakfast. That's also a yes." Arthur closed his eyes. "He is more than the gondola guy." Most people are more than the worst thing they want, Caleb said before he could stop himself. The old man opened his eyes again. There was no offense in them, only fatigue. "And some are less than the best thing they built." The sentence settled in the room. Caleb did not like how much truth it carried. He had known men who could save a village in daylight and break their own families by sundown because courage in one place did not guarantee gentleness in another. He had known himself to be patient with strangers and short with the boy he loved most because Eli's fear could slip under his armor where nothing else could. He poured coffee for Arthur, mostly milk from the last carton, warmed until it gave off a little steam. Arthur took it with both hands. They shook. Eli pretended not to notice. Caleb noticed him pretending and loved him for it. "How did you get out here?" Caleb asked. "My driver missed the lower turn before dark. I told him to stop at the service road. He argued naturally. Young men argue with old men because they mistake age for confusion." "Sometimes old men are confused," Eli said. Arthur pointed a trembling finger at him. "Also true. Never trust a story that leaves out the embarrassing parts." Eli grinned. Caleb did not. "You left the vehicle." I knew Preston was bringing the survey team at first light after the storm. I knew if I waited, he would begin something hard to undo. Arthur took a careful sip. The service road looked shorter on the old map. Caleb looked at the blank windows. Old maps are liars after 3 feet of snow. Yes, Arthur said. I learned that with some enthusiasm. He coughed, turning his face into a towel. Caleb waited until it passed. No alarming sign. Good. He hated that his mind still sorted small changes into private categories of danger and relief. Eli pushed his bowl away and slid from the chair. What's in the backpack? Arthur's hand tightened. Caleb said, Eli, I didn't ask to steal it, I asked with manners. Arthur's smile came easier this time. A fair distinction. He looked at the pack near the stove, now dry on the outside but still dark in the seams. Old paper, older guilt, a photograph, a coin, things that should have been given to my son before money made his ears too expensive. Eli looked impressed. Can ears get expensive? Some men's can, Caleb said. Arthur's expression turned toward him. Yours? Caleb did not answer. Ranger chose that moment to rise, shake himself violently, and send a little weather of dog hair and melted snow across the floor. Eli laughed. Caleb gave the dog a flat look. Outside if you're going to redecorate. Ranger sneezed, which Eli took as a confession. For a few minutes the room softened. Eli scraped the bowls. Caleb rationed coffee grounds for one more pot later. Arthur told them the cane was named Old Moses because it had parted crowds in airport snowdrifts in Wyoming and one very stubborn line at a church supper in Ohio. It did not actually part the church ladies, Arthur admitted. It merely made them feel sorry for me. Eli said, That's tactical. Arthur nodded. Exactly. Caleb let the humor stand because it was doing good work. It kept Eli from staring too long at the bank notice under the flour tin, or the fact that Caleb had watered the rice more than usual. It kept Arthur awake. It kept Caleb from picking up the pack and demanding to know why a stranger carried a piece of Caleb's buried life on his back. By noon, the storm deepened. The wind came harder from the west, pressing snow into the window seams and forcing smoke back down the stovepipe until the room smelled of iron and bitter wood. Caleb wrapped a scarf around his face and went outside to clear the pipe, tying a rope from his waist to the porch post because pride was a poor substitute for a way home. Ranger went with him, bounding through chest-deep drifts until even he slowed, offended by the depth. The world beyond the porch was pure white motion. The pines appeared and vanished like dark thoughts. Caleb climbed the short ladder, knocked ice from the stovepipe cap, checked the roof load over the kitchen, and shoveled enough from the porch to keep the door opening inward. In the buried yard, the survey stakes Preston's men had left 2 weeks earlier were gone. Caleb knew where they stood anyway. A neat line across his land over the little training yard where Ranger still followed commands when his joints allowed past the carved bench Hannah had built from a fallen pine straight toward the rise where she and Owen were remembered in different ways. Hannah in a carved marker beneath the Jeffrey pine because she had loved trees more than stone. Owen in a small brass plate on the wall of the shed because no body had come home. Only a folded flag, a box of gear, and a silence Caleb did not know where to put. The Whitcomb plan would erase none of that officially. Official maps were clean. They called grief access corridor and memory grade improvement. Caleb stood in the snow until the cold bit through his gloves. Ranger nudged his thigh. Time to move. The dog was often wiser than men and almost never polite about it. Inside, Eli had coaxed Arthur into telling a story about the biggest fish he had never caught. Never caught? Eli asked. The finest fish are uncaught, Arthur said. Once you catch them, they become measurements and dinner. If they escape, they become legend. That sounds like something a person says after losing a fish, It is exactly that. Caleb took off his wet outer layer and hung it near the stove. The house smelled of damp, wool-weak coffee dog and the faint sweetness of the peaches he refused to open. Arthur watched him with a focus that made Caleb uneasy. You move like a man who has counted exits in every room since he was young. Habit. The patch you saw last night? Arthur said. Eli looked up sharply. Caleb kept his face still. What patch? The boy asked. Nothing, Caleb said. Arthur shook his head. Not nothing. A bad thing, maybe. A holy thing, depending on which end of it a man survived. Caleb turned toward the stove. You need rest. I have rested for 14 years when I should have spoken. Arthur's voice was soft, but something in it cut through the room. Eli sat very still. Ranger came to Caleb's side, not touching, just near. Arthur reached for the pack. His hand trembled too much. Caleb could have refused. He could have said the old man was feverish, that the storm was not the time, that Eli was too young, that certain doors in a man's life stayed shut because opening them let weather in. Instead, he brought the pack and set it near Arthur's chair. Arthur rested his palm on the top flap, not opening it yet. In 2012, I was with a medical relief convoy outside a village whose name your news never learned to pronounce. I was a doctor then, or close enough to one for people who needed help. Our road was supposed to be safe. Roads are like promises. They are safest until someone decides to break them. Caleb felt Eli watching him. He did not look down. Arthur continued carefully, as if he had spent years sanding the sharpest edges from the memory so it could be held without cutting everyone in the room. There was confusion, smoke. Vehicles stopped where they should not stop. People shouting. I remember thinking of my son because fear, real fear, makes a man honest for 1 second. I thought Preston will be alone, and I have spent too many years teaching him accounts and not enough teaching him mercy. He swallowed. Then men came through the smoke. Quiet men, fast when they needed to be, gentle where it mattered. One of them knocked 3 times on the side of the vehicle before forcing the door. I remember that. 3 knocks as if he were asking permission from a dying world. Caleb's mouth went dry. Eli's face changed, not with understanding yet, but with the instinct children have when they hear the floor of family history creak under them. The man who pulled me out had gray eyes, Arthur said. Younger than you are now. He carried me as if I weighed less than the pack I carried last night. A dog cleared the way ahead of him, a dark German shepherd with 1 torn ear. Ranger's tail stopped moving. Caleb heard the stove pop. He heard the wind. He heard his own pulse in his ears. Many men served with dogs, Caleb said. Arthur nodded. Many did. He unbuckled the pack with slow fingers and drew out a plastic sleeve. Inside was a photograph, blurred and faded, taken from some distance by a relief worker or a soldier who had no idea the image would become a relic. Caleb saw the stopped convoy, the low shape of a vehicle, a younger version of himself, half turned from the camera, helmet on one arm under the shoulders of an old man. In the lower corner, Ranger appeared as a dark streak with the torn ear unmistakable against the pale road. Behind them stood Owen Kessler, hand raised, face turned away. Caleb's knees did not buckle, nothing so dramatic. He simply felt the room tilt and then right itself, as if the house had taken a breath under him. Eli slipped from his chair and came closer. Dad? Caleb could not answer. Arthur held the photograph out, but Caleb did not take it. The old man's eyes filled, though his voice stayed steady. I did not know your name then. Later I asked. I was told only enough to pray badly and specifically. Mercer, Kessler, Ranger, 3 names. I kept them. Eli looked at the dog, then at Caleb. Ranger was there? Yes, Caleb said. It came out rough. He was there. And you saved Mr. Arthur? Caleb looked at the photograph. He remembered orders, noise, the weight of another human body, Owen's voice saying something ridiculous to keep everyone moving, Ranger refusing to leave a second vehicle until Caleb listened. He remembered after. He remembered the report with clean sentences that did not know how to hold the cost. A lot of people did their jobs, he said. Arthur's hand tightened around the picture. Some jobs leave a debt. Before Caleb could respond, a sound rose beyond the storm, low at first, mechanical, not thunder, not wind. Ranger's head snapped toward the front door. Eli ran to the window and rubbed frost with his sleeve. "Dad," he said. "Lights!" Caleb crossed the room. Through the blurred pane far up the buried service road, amber strobes pulsed behind the snowfall. 1, 2, then more. Engines growled under the white silence, snowmobiles, at least 3. A larger shape behind them, maybe a snowcat. Above the ridge, faint and distant, came the chop of helicopter blades, turning away because no pilot with sense would stay low in this weather. Arthur closed his eyes. My son. Caleb stared through the glass as the lights advanced toward the cabin, toward the hidden survey line, toward the debt under his flour tin, and the history now lying open in an old man's lap. Ranger lifted one paw and touched the floor 3 times. The first snowmobile appeared out of the storm like a yellow-eyed insect headlamp trembling through the white air. Then another came behind it, and another behind that, each machine moving slowly, because even money had to respect a mountain when the mountain was in a mood. Caleb stood at the window until the lead rider raised one gloved hand and cut the engine near the porch. The sudden quiet felt larger than the noise. Ranger remained at Caleb's left knee, not growling but balanced forward on his paws with the old readiness that made his age vanish. Eli hovered near the hallway, one hand against the doorframe. Arthur sat wrapped in Hannah's quilt, color better than it had been, but body bent with exhaustion, his big canvas pack resting against the chair like an accusation no one had agreed to read aloud. "Stay behind me," Caleb said. Eli said, "I know." "Say it back. Stay behind you. And Ranger, don't grab his collar unless you tell me." "Good." Caleb opened the door before the first knock because he disliked giving strangers the pleasure of announcing themselves on his own porch. Snow swept in low across the floor. Preston Whitcomb stood beyond the threshold in a black technical parka too expensive to look warm. A wool scarf tucked perfectly at his throat, goggles pushed up over a face built from sharp lines and careful discipline. He was 46, maybe, with a trimmed dark beard and eyes the same pale blue as Arthur's, though Preston's had been polished by boardrooms until little weather showed in them. Behind him, 2 men in company jackets waited beside the snowmobiles, and a larger snowcat idled farther down the buried drive, amber light spinning across the pines. A third man, broader and older, stood with a clipboard sealed in plastic under one arm and an engineer's hood pulled low. Wade Sutter, Caleb guessed. Foreman. The kind of man who knew exactly how much diesel a bad decision cost. Preston looked first at Caleb, then past him into the cabin. His face changed when he saw Arthur. It was quick, but Caleb caught it, fear unclenching into relief before pride could shut the door. "Dad." Arthur lifted his hand. "You brought half a company into a blizzard. You walked into one. Then we have both been foolish." Preston took one step forward. Caleb did not move aside. The 2 men looked at each other across 6 inches of cold air and a lifetime of different training. Preston was accustomed to entrances opening. Caleb was accustomed to deciding who got through. "I'm Preston Whitcomb," the man said. "I know. My father needs medical attention. He needs warmth, rest, and a doctor when the road opens. He also needed not to freeze on my porch." Preston's jaw tightened. "And I am grateful." He said it cleanly, almost correctly, as if gratitude were a contract clause he had reviewed on the way in. Arthur sighed from the chair. "Try again, son." The corner of Eli's mouth twitched. Caleb saw it, and nearly lost his own sternness. Preston removed his gloves, perhaps to prove he was not hiding a weapon, or perhaps because manners still had some claim on him. "Mr. Mercer," he said slower now, "you saved my father's life. Thank you." Caleb stepped aside. "Don't track snow past the mat." Preston paused, looked down at his polished boots already crusted white, and obeyed. That small obedience told Caleb more than the man's introduction. Preston entered the cabin, and the space seemed to shrink around his clean lines and expensive fabric. He crossed to Arthur and crouched stiffly, not touching him at first, inspecting him with the worried restraint of a son who had forgotten how to be a boy. "You scared everyone." Arthur studied him. "Everyone?" Preston's eyes flicked away. "The driver, the staff, me?" "Ah," Arthur said. "There you are." Preston's mouth pressed thin. Caleb shut the door and barred it, not because he was trapping anyone, but because heat mattered. Wade Sutter remained outside with the men, directing them to cut the engines and set a temporary windbreak near the snowcat. Practical. Caleb appreciated practical. Preston rose, the sun buried again beneath the executive. "I have a medic coming by helicopter as soon as visibility allows." "Visibility does not care who you know," Caleb said. Preston turned. "No, but pilots answer the phone when I call." "Weather answers last." Eli whispered, "That's pretty good, Dad." Caleb did not look at him. Arthur did and smiled. Preston's gaze moved around the cabin now that the first shock had passed. Caleb could almost see the room becoming numbers in his head. Roof load, old wiring, cracked window, pantry thin stove, outdated, property value depressed by access issues but improved by corridor potential. His eyes landed on the bank envelope half hidden under the flour tin. Caleb watched him notice it. Preston noticed Caleb watching. "You received our revised offer." "I received paper." "Paper can be useful." "So can kindling." Preston inhaled through his nose. The room cooled in a way that had nothing to do with the door. Arthur leaned forward. "Preston." "Dad, please." Preston did not raise his voice, but command lived in it naturally. "You are unwell. I need to handle this." Ranger stood. The movement was quiet, but everyone felt it. Caleb placed a hand near the dog's shoulder, not restraining him, simply telling him the room was still theirs. Preston looked at Ranger. "Is that the dog from the photograph?" Caleb said nothing. Arthur closed his eyes, displeased with timing. Preston seemed to file the question away. Business first, heart later. Men like him often believed there would be later. "Mr. Mercer," Preston said, "I will be direct. Whitcomb Alpine Holdings has secured development rights for the Granite Bowl corridor. Your parcel is the final private holdout on the South Access route. The bank lien on this property matures in 10 days. If it proceeds as scheduled, the lender will take possession and my company will purchase the parcel from them. That is the legal path." Eli's hand tightened on the doorframe. Caleb felt it without looking. "And the illegal path?" he asked. Preston's brows drew together. "There is no illegal path." "Then why say legal, like you're proud of it?" Wade Sutter coughed outside the door, either from cold or because he had heard through the wall. Preston glanced toward the sound, then back. "Because I would prefer not to see a veteran and his child removed by a bank when I can offer a better solution." "Your solution being I leave?" "My solution being you leave with enough money to start over well." Preston reached into the inside pocket of his parka and withdrew a sealed envelope thick enough to be insulting. He set it on the table beside Eli's abandoned bowl. "This is a purchase agreement at a premium far above market. It clears your debt. It provides relocation funds to school support for your son and a consulting payment if you sign a non-obstruction clause. I can have a heated apartment ready in Reno by tomorrow evening, or a house near Carson City by the end of the week. You can take the dog. You can take whatever possessions you need. My people will pack the rest." "Generous," Caleb said. "It is." "You hear yourself?" Preston's face hardened. "I hear a man offering stability," Arthur said. "You hear a man pricing another man's roots." Preston looked back at his father. "Roots are noble until they become chains. Look around this room. He is burning his last wood. His son is eating rationed rice. The roof is one heavy storm from trouble, and the bank does not care how many memories are nailed to the walls. I am offering him a way out." Eli spoke before Caleb could stop him. "This is not out. This is home." Preston's gaze shifted to the boy, and for a moment, something uncertain passed through him. Children were harder to negotiate with. They had no patience for polished reasons. "Eli," Caleb said softly. The boy dropped his eyes, but he did not retreat. Preston set both palms on the table, leaning slightly forward. "Mr. Mercer, the survey team was scheduled to mark the final grade this morning. Because of my father, I am delaying until dawn tomorrow. That gives you time to accept a better future before the bank gives you no future at all." Caleb looked at the envelope. Thick paper, clean ink, the kind of money that could fix Eli's window, fill the woodshed, pay medical bills, replace boots, buy groceries without counting cans. For one treacherous second he saw it. A warm apartment. Eli at a decent school. Ranger sleeping without drafts in his old bones. No bank letters under flower tins, no roof groaning under snow. Then he saw Hannah's scarf on the hook. He saw the training yard buried outside. He saw the little rise where Owen's brass plate caught the morning light in summer. He saw Eli at 6, building a crooked fort from pine branches and declaring it a forward operating base for cookies. He saw Ranger carrying one of Hannah's socks after the funeral and laying it at Caleb's feet because the dog knew something was missing and wanted to help retrieve it. Preston's offer did not include any of that. It could not. "No," Caleb said. Preston blinked once. He had expected resistance, but not that quickly. "You should read it." "No." "At least consider the amount." "There isn't an amount." Preston straightened. "Everyone has an amount." Caleb stepped closer until the table stood between them like a narrow border. "That may be true in your world. In mine, some places are not for sale because they are holding too many people who can't speak for themselves anymore." Preston's voice lowered. "If this is about your wife's marker, we can relocate it respectfully." The room went very still. Eli's face emptied. Ranger gave one low sound, not a bark, but enough. Caleb felt something old and hot rise in him. Then he put it down because Eli was watching. "You don't relocate a promise," Caleb said. "You keep it or you break it." Arthur whispered, "Preston, stop." Preston looked frustrated now, and under the frustration was fear. Not fear of Caleb. Fear of time delay, investors losing control, losing his father again after finding him alive in a stranger's quilt. "My company is not trying to dishonor anyone," he said. "The access corridor is the safest, most direct grade. It serves the whole development. It creates jobs. It brings medical access, winter transit, tax revenue. This is not a villain's plan, Mr. Mercer. It is progress." Caleb almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. Progress is a fine word. It gets invited into rooms where greed would be turned away. Preston's eyes flashed. "Careful, I am." Caleb tapped the envelope with 2 fingers and pushed it back across the table. "Take your money." Preston did not pick it up. "You have 10 days before the bank acts." "Then I have 10 days." "No," Preston said, and now the edge sharpened. "You have until tomorrow morning before my grace period ends. After that, I proceed through the bank. I will acquire this property lawfully. You and your son will leave with much less than I am offering now." Eli made a small sound. Caleb hated Preston for hearing it and hated himself for causing it. Arthur struggled to rise from the chair. The quilt slipped from his shoulders. "Enough!" Caleb moved to help him, but Arthur waved him off and leaned on old Moses, the cane planted hard on the floor. His huge pack loomed beside him, and for an instant he looked like an ancient traveler carrying every sin of his family on his back. "You do not repay a man for saving your father by measuring his pain against your schedule." Preston turned on him. "I am trying to prevent ruin. You are trying to purchase silence. I am trying to build something, then build around him." Preston laughed once, short and cold. "Around him? Around a parcel that sits on the cleanest grade through granite bowl? Around unstable rock and protected drainage and months of blasting? Do you know what that costs?" Arthur's voice thinned, but did not bend. "Less than your soul, I hope." The words struck. Preston's face changed, and not for the better. "You left a hospital advisory meeting, walked into a blizzard with a backpack full of ghosts, and nearly died on this man's porch. Do not lecture me about souls while I am the one keeping the world functioning." "Functioning," Arthur said sadly. "What a small dream for a life." For a moment, father and son stared at each other across everything unsaid. Then Preston looked away first. He picked up the envelope and tucked it back inside his coat. "I will return it first light." "Mr. Mercer, I strongly advise you to make the practical choice." Caleb opened the door. Snow swirled in, bright and furious. "Practical men should wear practical boots." Wade Sutter, still outside, looked down at Preston's polished footwear and hid a smile badly. Eli saw and almost laughed, then swallowed it. Preston stepped onto the porch. At the threshold, he turned back toward Arthur. The anger had not erased the sun completely. "A heated medical unit is in the snow can. Please come with me." Arthur sank back into the chair, exhausted. "Not yet. Dad, I said not yet." Preston's hand curled, then opened. He nodded once, the movement tight enough to cut thread, and went down the steps. Engines started. Men moved. Amber lights spun again, throwing brief gold across the cabin walls. Caleb shut the door and barred it. For several seconds, no one spoke. Eli crossed the room and picked up his cold bowl from the table, though there was nothing left in it. "Are we going to lose the house?" Caleb wanted to give a brave answer. He had spent years disliking men who comforted children with lies. "I don't know," he said. Eli nodded as if he had expected that, as if honesty were heavy but carryable. Arthur leaned back, breathing hard. "My son was not always like this." Caleb looked at the old man. "Rich? Afraid." The word shifted the room. Arthur closed his eyes. "His mother died when he was young. Not suddenly, which is its own mercy sometimes, but slowly enough for a boy to learn that love could stand beside a bed and still not stop the leaving. I was away too often. Work service, foolishness with noble names. Preston decided if he owned enough, planned enough, controlled enough, nothing could be taken from him without his permission." Caleb watched snow climb the lower window. "The world doesn't ask permission. No." Arthur's hand moved toward the pack. "But sometimes it sends receipts." Ranger rose and went to the pack. He sniffed the outer pocket where the faded patch hid, then looked at Caleb. Eli watched them both. Caleb felt the day closing around him, not darker yet, but narrower. Outside Preston Whitcomb's machines idled on the edge of his land, waiting to turn memory into corridor. Inside, an old man with a cane and a pack full of the past struggled to breathe by Caleb's stove. And beneath the flour tin, the bank notice sat like a clock that had learned to count without ticking. The storm did not ease after Preston left. It settled lower over the cabin, pressing snow against the windows until daylight became a gray rumor, and the lamps burned at noon as if evening had gotten impatient. Caleb checked the stovepipe again from inside, listened to the draft, fed the fire one narrow split of pine, and forced himself not to look at the wood rack too often. There were enough logs for the day, if he rationed well. Enough was a word that changed shape depending on fear. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor with the hand-crank radio between his knees, turning the handle in slow circles while static muttered from the speaker. Ranger lay near Arthur's chair, eyes following every movement, especially the old man's hand when it drifted toward the big canvas pack. Arthur had stopped pretending he was only tired. His breath came shallow after speaking, and the cough left him pale around the mouth. Mara would know what to do. Mara Delgado knew what to do about most things, which was one reason Caleb avoided asking her unless the roof was on fire, metaphorically or otherwise. She lived 3 miles down the old service road, worked mountain rescue and part-time clinic shifts, and had a way of looking at him that made his excuses feel overdressed. She had brought soup after Hannah died, then came back the next week with batteries, then the week after with a rebuilt generator carburetor and no pity in her face. Caleb preferred help that announced itself as a tool. Mara understood that and handed him wrenches instead of sympathy. Now the road between them was buried, the phone was dead, and Arthur needed more than coffee and pride. Eli stopped cranking the radio. "Dad, do you think Mr. Preston will really come back tomorrow?" "Yes." "Do you think he'll bring more papers?" "Men like that always bring papers." "Can we bring scissors?" Arthur gave a dry little laugh, then coughed until Caleb moved to help him sit forward. Ranger stood worried and pressed his shoulder against the old man's knee. When the coughing passed, Arthur patted the dog's head with a trembling hand. "This one has better manners than many board members I have met." Eli brightened. "Ranger once ate a tax form." Caleb looked at him. "Ranger did not eat it, he sampled the corner." "The corner with the signature. A tragic clerical event." Arthur smiled. The room warmed by half a degree. Then his gaze moved to the saber-straight line of Caleb's shoulders, the way his hands rested too still on his knees. "You do not have to tell the boy everything," Arthur said quietly. "But you should tell him enough that silence does not become a monster under his bed." Caleb's eyes lifted. Eli looked down at the radio quickly. Too late. Children heard invitations adults were too afraid to accept. Caleb stood and went to the sink, though there were no dishes to wash. The window over it showed only snow and the faint dark smear of pines. "What exactly do you think I owe him?" "Truth in a size he can carry." Caleb let out a slow breath. "You're a doctor, not a chaplain." At 77, the job descriptions blur. Arthur shifted under Hannah's quilt. "The photograph in my pack is not the whole proof. There is a journal, names, dates, a letter from the relief organization, a challenge coin given to me by a man whose name I did not deserve to forget." Caleb closed his eyes. Owen. Even thinking the name felt like opening a door into weather. Owen Kessler had been the kind of man who could make instant coffee taste like a moral victory. He had taught Ranger to steal only left socks because, according to Owen, right socks looked more judgmental. He had carried a tiny New Testament in a waterproof pouch and claimed he was not religious, just keeping emergency management upstairs informed. Caleb had watched him kneel beside frightened civilians with a gentleness that made the uniform seem secondary. After the mission that saved Arthur and others, after the smoke cleared and the reports were filed, Owen's family received polished words and a folded flag. Caleb received Ranger, a box of gear, and a silence that followed him home. The official version did not name much, Caleb said. Arthur nodded. Official versions often sweep the floor and call the room clean. Eli rose slowly, leaving the radio on the floor. "Dad, was Owen the one whose name is on the shed?" Caleb turned. The boy had never asked so directly. Caleb had never invited him to. Yes. Was he your friend? Yes. Was Ranger his dog too? Ranger's ears lifted at the name, and Caleb felt an ache so old it had roots. Ranger worked with both of us. He liked Owen better when Owen had beef jerky. Ranger likes everyone better with beef jerky. True. Eli came a step closer. Did Mr. Arthur know him? Caleb looked at Arthur. The old man answered with care. I knew him for less than an hour, Eli, and I have prayed for him for 14 years. The boy considered this. That's a long time to know somebody for an hour. Some hours are larger than years. Caleb gripped the sink edge. The room did not tilt this time. It only opened. Arthur bent forward, reaching for the pack. Caleb crossed and stopped him with a hand on the shoulder. I'll get it. He set the pack on the table. The canvas had dried enough to show old stains, faded travel tags, and a hand-stitched repair along one side. It smelled of wet cloth, dust, and the faint medicinal odor of someone who had spent too much time near clinics. Arthur unbuckled the flap himself. Inside, everything was wrapped with almost ceremonial care. He removed the leather notebook, a packet of letters sealed in plastic, the photograph, and a small velvet pouch tied with cord. Eli stood on tiptoe to see, but did not touch. Caleb appreciated the restraint. Arthur opened the pouch and tipped a coin into his palm. It was a challenge coin, worn smooth at the edges, its design scratched by years of handling. Caleb knew it. He did not need to touch it. Owen had carried two, claiming one was for luck and the other was for when luck forgot its appointment. He pressed this into my hand before they loaded me onto the evacuation helicopter, Arthur said. I was half out of my mind with cold and fear and whatever medicine they had given me. I remember asking why. He said because old men should have pocket thunder. I did not understand him. Caleb almost smiled. It hurt. That sounds like Owen. Eli whispered, Pocket thunder. Arthur closed his fingers around the coin. I tried to return it through channels. The response came back incomplete. Then years passed. I told myself I would find the families, the men, the dog. I told myself many useful lies. Why now? Caleb asked. Arthur looked toward the buried window, toward where Preston's machines had gone. Because my son found your land before I found my courage. The words landed without ornament. Get 31 sat at the table. For once his body chose honesty before his mind approved. Arthur turned a page in the journal. Names appeared in careful handwriting. Villages, clinics, drivers, interpreters, soldiers who had assisted. Dates of calls made, fragments of memory gathered while healing. Caleb's name was there. Owen's. Ranger's, with a question mark after it, in the early pages, and then later underlined. I learned Preston's company had targeted this parcel when a packet crossed my desk by mistake, Arthur said. He still sends me documents because he believes it is respect. Usually I sign what needs signing and let him build his bright, efficient world. This time I saw your name. I saw the old service road. I saw Kessler on a memorial note in a local article about your wife and avalanche rescue. His voice weakened. I packed everything. I meant to meet Preston at the site office, not arrive as a frozen burden on your floor. You were trying to stop him, Eli said. Yes. With a backpack. It seemed more dignified when I planned it, Eli nodded. Plans are like that. Ranger chose then to nudge the pack sniffing near the side pocket. He sneezed twice and looked offended. Eli said, He says the backpack smells like old basement. It has earned that smell, Arthur replied. Caleb turned the journal gently, not reading every line, only enough to see the proof was real. His younger self existed there as a witness in another man's handwriting. It made him uncomfortable. Hero stories did that. They flattened a person until others could hang admiration on the wall. What the journal did not show was Caleb snapping at Hannah when he came home because the grocery store lights were too bright and she had asked a simple question twice. It did not show him standing in the shower with his hands against the tile, waiting for his breathing to become his own. It did not show Owen's mother gripping Caleb's hand at the memorial and saying, "Tell me he wasn't afraid," and Caleb lying because mercy sometimes wore the same coat as falsehood. "This does not change the bank," Caleb said. Arthur's face softened with sorrow. "No." "It does not change Preston's contracts." "No." "It does not bring Owen back." Arthur's eyes filled. "No, son, it does not." Caleb pushed back from the table and stood, too fast. Ranger rose with him. Eli's mouth opened, then closed. Caleb took his parka from the hook. "I'm checking the shed. Dad, I need air. In a blizzard, shed, air." Eli looked at Arthur. "That's not a thing, is it?" Arthur said. "It is when a man is trying not to break in front of people he loves." Caleb stopped with one hand on the door. The sentence was too accurate to fight. He went out anyway. The cold struck him clean across the face. Good. Pain, when honest and simple, could be useful. He crossed the porch and dug through the snow toward the shed, Ranger pushing beside him, shoulder against Caleb's thigh now and then, as if checking whether the man was still inside his own body. The shed door took 2 pulls. Inside, dim light filtered through gaps in the boards. Tools hung in careful rows. Hannah's snowshoes. Eli's old sled. The brass plate for Owen mounted above the workbench, polished because Caleb polished it when he could not sleep. Owen Kessler. Friend. Brother. Light on the dark road. Caleb stood before it, gloves hanging from one hand, breath white in the cold. "You hear this?" he said softly. Ranger sat beside him. "Your old coin came back. Dramatic even for him." The dog leaned into his leg. Caleb placed one palm against the workbench. He did not cry in the grand way people described in books. His eyes burned. His throat worked. 2 breaths came wrong before the 3rd came right. That was all. Sometimes grief did not pour. Sometimes it tapped. Once. Twice. 3 times. Behind him, the shed door opened. Caleb turned too sharply, then stopped when he saw Eli standing there in boots too large, coat half-buttoned, carrying Hannah's red scarf in both hands. "I know you said keep inside," Eli said. "I decided that was more of a weather suggestion." Caleb should have scolded him. Instead, he crouched and opened one arm. Eli came into it with the desperate dignity of a boy pretending he had meant to hug his father all along. Ranger pressed against both of them, because Ranger believed all family formations were improved by dog hair. "Are we going to fight, Mr. Preston?" Eli asked into Caleb's shoulder. Caleb thought about the word fight, its many meanings, its many costs. "We're going to tell the truth where he can hear it. What if he doesn't care?" Caleb looked at Owen's plate, then toward the buried house where Arthur sat with his old pack and older guilt. "Then we make him look at what not caring costs." The shed filled with wind. Snow hissed along the floor. From the cabin came a faint sound barely audible through the storm. 3 taps on glass. Arthur's cane against the window. Caleb turned. A shadow moved beyond the whitened pane. The old man was calling them back. Ranger stood ears forward and tapped the shed floor 3 times in answer. Arthur had not tapped the window because he was frightened. That would have been reasonable considering the wind, the fever the son with lawyers, and the fact that he had nearly become part of the snow less than 24 hours earlier. He had tapped because a red light had begun blinking on the silent radio, and Eli, who usually knew how to coax miracles from broken electronics, was outside, disobeying instructions with his father. By the time Caleb and Eli reached the porch, Ranger plowing ahead with offended importance, the radio was spitting pieces of a voice through static. Caleb shut the door hard against the storm and crossed the room in 3 strides. Mercer Place, repeat, Mara Delgado. The signal collapsed into a hiss, then returned for half a breath. If you can hear me, I am coming up the West Creek line. Do not shoot the nice nurse. Eli's face lit. Mara! Caleb grabbed the handset, though the unit was receive only unless the antenna behaved, which it rarely did without being begged or threatened. Mara, this is Caleb. Do you copy? Static answered. He adjusted the antenna, turning it inch by inch. Mara, stay put. Road is gone. Do not come up here. The radio popped. Mara's voice came through clearer, amused and irritated in equal measure. That sounded like a suggestion from a man who once climbed my roof with a fever to fix a gutter. Eli whispered to Arthur, She has receipts. Arthur said, A formidable woman. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. Mara, conditions are bad. Yes, I noticed when the snow tried to swallow my sled. You have a sled? Rescue, Polk, snowshoes, med bag, terrible attitude. I am half a mile out. Put coffee on if you have any left. The signal vanished. Caleb stared at the radio as if glaring might carry backward through the mountain. Eli smiled for the first time that day without effort. She said terrible attitude like it was equipment. For Mara it is. Arthur settled deeper into the chair. I already like her. Caleb did not say he did too. Some truths became more dangerous when spoken near witnesses. He checked the windows, then the door, then the stove, then his watch because the body sometimes needed a circuit to run while the heart absorbed news. Mara coming meant medicine hands trained for winter injuries, another adult voice in the house. It also meant someone else would see the debt, the thin pantry, the way Caleb flinched when certain sounds hit the walls. Help was never simple. It entered carrying a lantern and a mirror. Less than 30 minutes later, Ranger alerted with one sharp bark, then bolted from his place to the door. Caleb stepped onto the porch with a headlamp and saw a figure emerge from the snowfall along the creek path, leaning into the wind with poles in both hands, a red rescue Polk dragging behind her. Mara Delgado was 34, strong through the shoulders, with dark hair braided under a wool cap and a yellow rescue jacket bright enough to make the storm look embarrassed. She reached the steps, lifted her goggles, and gave Caleb the look she reserved for men who had made poor decisions and survived only because God was patient. You look awful. Good to see you too. That was the polite version. Ranger shoved past Caleb and greeted her with a full-body lean that nearly knocked her sideways. Mara braced herself. Ranger, my love, you are either happy to see me or trying to file a structural complaint. Eli rushed out and grabbed the Polk rope. I can help. You can carry the small bag, Captain. I'm not a captain. You are in my current chain of command because you are the only one here who answers direct questions. Caleb said, I answer direct questions. Mara looked him up and down. You often respond to them. Arthur laughed from inside and started coughing. Mara's whole face changed. Humor folded away, not gone, just set aside. She entered, stripped off snow-covered outer layers, washed her hands with water Caleb warmed, and moved to Arthur with brisk gentleness. She asked his name, age, symptoms, medications, medical history, last food, last clear urination, whether he had chest pain, whether his confusion came and went. Arthur answered as best he could. When he tried to charm his way around details, Mara tapped his wrist with 2 fingers. Sir, I am Catholic, undercaffeinated, and not impressed by men avoiding medical questions. Arthur looked delighted. Preston should hire you. Preston should sit down and drink water, probably. Caleb almost smiled. Mara listened to Arthur's lungs, checked his temperature, examined his fingers and feet without dramatizing anything, and spoke in practical terms, safe enough for Eli's ears. He is improving, but he needs monitoring. Warmth, fluids, food, no hero speeches longer than 2 minutes. Arthur raised a finger. 3. 1.5 if you bargain, Eli said. She's serious. I am always serious about old men trying to out-talk their lungs, Mara said. She unpacked supplies or L-rehydration packets, a thermal blanket, hand warmers, a small oxygen monitor, medicine, she explained carefully before giving. Caleb watched her hands. Steady. Capable. Hannah's hands had been like that in storms, different but steady. He looked away before memory made comparisons unfair. Mara noticed the pack on the table, the photograph still near it, the challenge coin in Arthur's palm. She did not ask immediately. That was one of her gifts. She knew the difference between silence that hid and silence that held. After Arthur was settled, Eli reheated coffee. It tasted burnt and thin, but Mara accepted it with the reverence of a pilgrim reaching a shrine. Perfect, she said. Eli looked skeptical. It might be bad. Perfect and bad can coexist, Arthur pointed at her. Wisdom. Caleb took the med bag to the counter. You should not have come alone. Mara lowered her cup. I did not come alone. I came with the Lord a sled and a flare gun, Mara. Caleb. The way she said his name made the argument tired before it started. Arthur needed help. Eli needed another adult. You needed someone to tell you your face is doing that locked door thing. Eli leaned toward Arthur. It is. Caleb looked at him. Eat something. That means yes, Eli informed Arthur. Mara's eyes softened, but she did not push. Instead, she saw the bank notice because everyone seemed destined to see it. Is that from First Basin Bank? Caleb said nothing. She sighed. Right. Locked door thing. Arthur lifted the journal. Miss Delgado, perhaps you should hear why my foolish feet brought me here. Caleb said, he needs rest. Mara turned to Arthur. Short version. Arthur gave her the outline, pausing when she made him drink the relief convoy years ago, Caleb and Rangers. Owen Kessler, the evidence in the pack, Preston's plan to take the access corridor through Caleb's land. He told it gently, focusing on rescue, fear, and debt. Mara listened with her cup held in both hands. Eli listened too, though Caleb wanted to send him outside and also wanted him never out of sight. When Arthur finished, the cabin felt fuller, as if the past had taken a seat at the table. Mara looked at Caleb. You never told me Arthur Whitcomb was connected to Owen. I found out last night. You also never told me Owen's mission involved Whitcomb. I didn't know his last name. And if you had? Caleb looked at Ranger. I don't know. That was the most honest answer he had given all day. Mara accepted it. She moved to the window and wiped frost from the lower pane. Outside, Preston's distant work lights glowed faintly through snow near the temporary camp. He will not move because of emotion alone, she said. Arthur nodded. No, Preston respects liability documentation, public consequence, and numbers that can be put in a column. Then we need all four. Caleb gave her a look. This is not a lawsuit meeting. No, it is a kitchen meeting, which is where most important American decisions happen. Eli raised his hand. I have graph paper. Excellent, Mara said. See, the Republic survives. Caleb almost laughed despite himself. Mara's plan came together without ceremony. Arthur had records proving Caleb and Owen had saved him. Hannah, before her death in an avalanche rescue, had mapped old slide paths around Granite Bowl for the volunteer rescue team. Eli knew where her map box was because he had been adding his own childish trail notes for 2 years. Wade Sutter, if he was half the foreman Caleb suspected, would understand that the direct corridor might be cheaper on paper and riskier on snow. Preston might ignore grief, but he would not ignore avoidable danger if it threatened permits, investors, insurance, and his father. This is not about extorting him, Mara said. It is about putting the whole truth on the table. Caleb looked at the photograph. Truth can still be used like a blade. Then do not swing it, Arthur said. Hold it up like a lamp. That sounded too polished, but in Arthur's tired voice, It did not feel false. Eli disappeared into the hallway and returned carrying a wooden box painted blue with Hannah's initials burned into the lid. Caleb's breath caught. "Where was that?" "Under Mom's snowshoes," Eli said. "You said not to mess with it unless it mattered." He placed it on the table with both hands. "I think it matters." Caleb touched the lid. The wood was smooth from Hannah's sanding. She had made the box the first spring after they bought the cabin, sitting on the porch in bright weather, tongue caught between her teeth as she burned her initials crooked and called them rustic. Inside were folded topo maps, rescue notes, old permit copies, avalanche observations, photographs of tree lines after storms, and Eli's newer editions in colored pencil. Caleb found one map marked in Hannah's careful block letters, granite bowl winter drainage and slide memory, not for development access. That last phrase made Mara whistle softly. She had opinions. She had many, Caleb said. She was usually right. Usually? Eli asked. Caleb glanced at him. She married me. Eli smiled. Maybe she liked projects. Arthur laughed, then obeyed Mara's raised eyebrow and stopped. The map showed a red line across the very access corridor Preston wanted. Hannah had marked weak layers, historic slides, wind-loaded slopes, and a safer northern swing around Granite Spur. More expensive, longer, but safer. Caleb felt the room shift again, this time not from memory, but from possibility. Preston did not only owe a moral debt. His plan was flawed. Not cartoon villain flawed, human flawed. Rushed, polished, profitable, incomplete. Caleb looked at Mara. If we bring this to him, he will say it needs expert review. Good, Mara said. Then make him order one before he destroys the evidence under 4 feet of snow. Arthur straightened, already tiring but alive with purpose. My son will ask why you waited until now. Caleb looked at Hannah's map, Owen's photograph, Eli's graph paper, Ranger sitting squarely beneath the table as if chairing the meeting. Because I was trying to survive instead of fight. Mara's voice softened. That is not a sin. It feels like one. Most grief does. It lies. The words found a place in him he had not meant to uncover. For a moment no one spoke. Then Ranger reached under the table, took one of Caleb's wool socks from the laundry basket and presented it to Arthur with immense solemnity. Eli burst out laughing. Mara covered her mouth. Arthur accepted the sock like an award. Caleb stared at the dog. Really? Ranger wagged once. The cabin, which had been holding too much sorrow, let some of it out through laughter. It did not solve anything. It did not pay the bank, or soften Preston, or clear the snow. But it reminded them they were not already defeated. By late afternoon, the light outside dimmed toward blue. Caleb packed Hannah's map, Arthur's journal, the photograph, the coin, the bank notice, and the original Whitcomb offer into a waterproof folder. Mara insisted Arthur could not walk to Preston's camp. Arthur insisted he would go if carried. Caleb said nobody was carrying anybody unless the cabin caught fire, which ended that version. They compromised Preston would be summoned to the porch, not allowed to control the room, not allowed to make Arthur stand in the cold, not allowed to turn Caleb's kitchen into a signing table. Eli found a scrap of cardboard and wrote a message in thick marker, medical update, come to cabin, bring Wade, no lawyers. He added after some thought, please, because Hannah had raised him correctly. Ranger watched Caleb tie the note into a plastic sleeve and attach it to a flare flag pole. Mara would set it by the temporary camp line when she checked the outdoor conditions. I can do it, Caleb said. I know, Mara replied. That is why it will be good for you to let me. He hated how often she was right. She went out into the storm, with Ranger trotting beside her for the first 50 yards before Caleb called him back. The dog obeyed reluctantly, pausing once to look into the snowfall. Then he came inside, shook snow onto Caleb's boots with surgical precision, and sat. Time stretched. Arthur dozed. Eli arranged maps by the stove to keep them flat. Caleb stood at the window, watching for movement near the camplights. He could feel the old current in his body, the before-action stillness, but this time there would be no raid, no breach, no harm delivered. Only words, only paper, only memory. Sometimes that took more courage. Near dusk, headlights moved beyond the trees. Two figures approached on foot through the snow. One tall and black-coated, one broader in a work jacket. Preston Whitcomb and Wade Sutter came toward the cabin, while the wind dragged veils of white between them. Arthur woke, as if called by name. Eli moved close to Caleb. Ranger stood at the door, ears forward, then lifted his paw and touched the floor 3 times. The past had reached the porch. Now somebody had to open the door. Caleb let Preston knock. Not because the sound was needed, and not because he enjoyed petty victories, though he was human enough to admit a small, mean corner of him did. He let the knock land because the cabin had rules older than Whitcomb Alpine Holdings, older than lean schedules and access corridors. And one of them was this: a man entering another man's home in winter asked permission. Preston knocked twice, brisk and controlled. Then, after a pause that suggested he had remembered something his father once taught him, he knocked a 3rd time. Eli looked up at Caleb with wide eyes. The motif had begun to notice itself. Ranger stood beside the door, still as carved wood. Caleb lifted the bar and opened. Preston was dusted with snow from shoulders to boots, his expensive scarf now pulled unevenly at the throat. Wade Sutter stood behind him, carrying a weatherproof tablet, a rolled survey map, and the expression of a man who would rather be fixing an engine than participating in family history. "Your note said medical update," Preston said. His gaze went past Caleb immediately to Arthur. "He is stable," Mara answered from near the stove. She had positioned herself where she could see everyone. "He needs continued warmth, fluids, and evacuation when weather allows. He does not need raised voices." Preston's mouth tightened. "I was misled. You were invited," Caleb said. "There's a difference." Arthur lifted a hand. "Come in, Preston, and bring Mr. Sutter. He seems to have the only sensible boots in your party." Wade looked down at his insulated work boots, then at Preston's polished ones, and wisely said nothing. The men entered. Caleb shut the door. For a moment, the cabin held too many bodies and too much unfinished business. Eli stood near the table, back straight, one hand resting on Ranger's shoulder. Mara leaned against the counter, arms folded. Arthur sat wrapped in quilts, the big canvas pack open beside him. Preston took in the maps, the waterproof folder, the photograph lying face down, and the bank notice placed deliberately where everyone could see it. "If this is an attempt to renegotiate through pressure," he began, "I should be clear that any agreement involving my father while he is medically compromised will be reviewed by counsel." Mara said, "That is the most expensive way anyone has ever said hello." Wade made a sound that might have been a cough. Caleb appreciated him more by the minute. Arthur pointed his cane at the chair opposite him. "Sit, son." Preston hesitated. He was a man who preferred standing because standing looked like control. Arthur waited. The old doctor's patience had probably outlived more stubborn men than Preston. At last, Preston sat. Wade remained near the door until Caleb nodded toward the bench. "You two. This concerns the ground you plan to cut." Wade sat slowly. "I figured it might." Caleb opened the folder. "Your company wants the South Access Corridor because it is the cleanest grade on paper. It crosses my parcel here, cuts past the old training yard, runs below the ridge, and meets the gondola base near Granite Bowl." He unfolded the survey copy and placed Hannah's map beside it. "My wife worked rescue in this area. Before she died, she mapped winter drainage and slide memory on that slope. Preston glanced at the map, but kept his face closed. We have geotechnical reports. Summer reports, Wade said quietly. Preston looked at him. Wade held up both hands slightly. I'm not arguing, sir, just stating. The winter layer assessment was scheduled after preliminary access, not before. Mara's eyebrow rose. That sounds backward. Wade grimaced. It sounds like a schedule written by people who prefer conference rooms. Preston said, Wade. You pay me to know when the mountain is lying under a nice line on a map, Wade replied, respectful but firm. Mrs. Mercer knew this bull. These marks are not random. Caleb felt a small pulse of gratitude toward the man and hid it because they were not friends yet. Preston leaned forward, studying the old markings despite himself. Hannah's handwriting moved across the topo lines like a voice in the room. Avoid after heavy west wind, old crown line, hidden drainage, not for development access. This would need review, Preston said. Agreed, Caleb said. The agreement seemed to annoy him. But review requires pausing the survey. That is a separate matter. Arthur's cane struck the floor once. Not hard, but enough. No, it is not. You cannot claim to build safely while refusing to look where you step. Preston turned to him. Dad, with respect, you are not an engineer. No, I am merely old enough to have watched confident men bury common sense under official stamps. The room tightened again. Caleb slid the photograph across the table, face down, still 2 fingers resting on it. There is another reason you pause. Preston looked at his hand. I assumed we would arrive there, then arrive. Caleb turned the photograph over. Preston's expression did not change at first. Boardroom training, Caleb thought. Never let the first emotion escape. But the eyes betrayed him. They sharpened, then faltered. Arthur reached for the challenge coin and placed it beside the photograph. 14 years ago, the old man said, a medical convoy I served with was caught in a terrible situation overseas. I will not dress it up for drama. People were afraid. Some were hurt. We were trapped. A SEAL team came through conditions most men would have avoided. Caleb Mercer pulled me out. Owen Kessler helped keep us alive long enough to reach evacuation. Ranger, younger and more arrogant then, found 2 men we might otherwise have left behind. Ranger's tail moved once at his name. Eli whispered, still arrogant. No one smiled except Arthur briefly. Preston stared at the image. His voice, when it came, was quieter. Why was I never told? Arthur's hand tightened on old Moses. Because I wanted to tell you properly and kept waiting for properly to become easy. Because after your mother died, then after my trips, then after your company grew, we became men who exchanged updates instead of truths. Because I was ashamed that strangers had shown me a kind of courage I had failed to teach my own son. Preston flinched. It was small, but real. That is unfair. Yes, Arthur said. Much truth is at first. Caleb did not enjoy watching it. He had expected some satisfaction when Preston was forced to look at the debt. Instead, he felt the discomfort of seeing a father strike a son's hidden bruise. Eli moved closer to him. Caleb rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. I am not asking you to worship the past, Caleb said. I am asking you not to pave over it because your schedule is cleaner without it. Preston lifted the photograph. This proves you saved my father. It proves several men saved your father, and one of them is gone. Caleb nodded once. Owen Kessler. His name is on my shed because there was nowhere else to put it. Preston's gaze dropped to the coin. This was his, Arthur answered. Yes. And you carried it all these years. Like a coward with a holy object, perhaps, Mara said gently, or like a man who finally reached the right door. Arthur looked at her with gratitude. Preston set the photograph down with careful fingers. I am grateful. Deeply, More than I can express in a kitchen full of people who already dislike me. Eli said, I don't dislike you. Preston looked surprised. Eli shrugged, I don't know you well enough. I dislike what you're doing. Wade coughed again. Mara looked at the ceiling. Caleb pressed his lips together. Preston absorbed it and, to his credit, did not snap. Fair. He looked back at Caleb. But gratitude does not erase contracts. Investors have committed based on this route. Equipment is staged. Permits are time-sensitive. I cannot reroute a multi-million-dollar project because my father failed to send a thank-you note 14 years ago. Arthur's face went pale with hurt, but he did not argue. Caleb felt anger move in him again, controlled but hot. That is what you took from this. Preston stood. I took from this that I owe you respect, perhaps compensation, certainly an apology. I do not owe you the collapse of a project that employs hundreds. Wade lifted a hand. Sir, if the winter hazard map checks out, the project is already at risk on the current route. Preston turned. Do you have enough to say that formally? Wade looked at Hannah's map. Enough to recommend a hold pending review. That is not the same as a reroute. No, but it's not nothing. The wind struck the cabin, rattling the windows. Ranger's head snapped toward the porch. A smell reached him before any human noticed. He rose and walked to the threshold and tapped the floor 3 times. Caleb turned. What? Ranger tapped again, more sharply. Caleb moved to the window. Through the snow, he saw a faint flicker near the temporary camp line orange where no orange should be. Wade stood fast. Generator. Preston frowned. What about it? Wade was already at the door. We had trouble with the auxiliary unit. If snow blocked the vent or a fuel line shook loose. Caleb did not wait for the end. He grabbed his parka, pulled the door open, and stepped into the storm with Ranger at his side. Preston followed. So did Wade. Mara said, Eli stays inside. I know, Eli said, though he hated it. Outside, the world had turned blue with evening, broken by the work lights glowing near Preston's camp. The orange flicker came from behind the snowcat, where a small equipment tent sagged under snow. Caleb could smell it now, a sharp mechanical scent under the clean cold. Dangerous, but not yet disaster if handled well. Cut the main power, Wade shouted to one of the crewmen. Move back from the tent. The men obeyed with the confused speed of people who knew enough to be afraid, but not enough to help. Caleb kept his voice low and clear. No sparks. Nobody goes in blind. Preston started toward the tent. Caleb caught his arm. Stay back. That is my equipment, and your people, so stay useful. For a second, Preston looked ready to pull rank on weather fuel and physics. Then a muffled pop from inside the tent made the decision for him. Everyone stepped back. Wade cursed under his breath, then called out instructions, keeping details simple and safe. Caleb and Ranger circled wide, checking for anyone near the tent. Ranger pulled hard toward the lee side, nose low. Caleb followed and found Wade's assistant, a young man named Ben, disoriented in the snow after slipping while trying to shut a valve. He was conscious, scared, and unable to get his footing in the drift. Caleb did not dramatize it. He did what needed doing. He dropped low, spoke the young man's name after reading it on his jacket, got an arm under him, and guided him away while Ranger paced beside them, body angled against the wind. Behind them, the equipment tent flashed with a sudden burst of light and heat, then collapsed inward with a heavy, contained roar that the snow swallowed quickly. No one was close enough to be caught by it. That was the point. Distance mattered. Listening mattered. Ranger's 3 taps had mattered. Mara met Caleb halfway, having come out despite her own order because of course she had, and took Ben's face in both hands, checking his awareness. Can you tell me your name? Ben. Good. Can you tell me why men ignore equipment warnings? Ben blinked. What? Correct answer. She guided him toward the cabin. Preston stood motionless in the snow, staring at the collapsed tent, then at Ranger, then at Caleb. Amber lights spun across his face. For the first time since entering the valley, he looked less like a man commanding a project and more like a son realizing the mountain did not care how much his family owned. Wade came up beside him. "Sir, if Mercer and the dog hadn't caught that—" He did not finish. He did not need to. Preston swallowed. "Is everyone accounted for?" Wade looked almost relieved by the question. "Yes. Because of them," Caleb brushed snow from his sleeves, suddenly tired. Ranger shook himself and leaned against his leg. Preston approached slowly. The wind tore at his scarf, making him look younger and less assembled. "Mr. Mercer." Caleb waited. Preston's eyes moved toward the cabin where Arthur's silhouette showed in the window, one hand against the glass. "I said gratitude does not erase contracts." His voice was rougher now. "Perhaps I should have said contracts do not erase gratitude." It was not surrender, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. Caleb nodded toward the cabin. "Then come inside and learn the rest before the mountain teaches it louder." Preston looked at the dark ridge, the buried corridor, the collapsed equipment tent already disappearing under fresh snow. Then he followed Caleb back through the storm, and at the door, Ranger paused, lifted his paw, and tapped the porch boards 3 times as if signing his own report. By the time they returned to the cabin, the storm had begun to sound less like weather and more like a congregation whispering outside the walls. Snow clung to Preston's shoulders and darkened his scarf. Wade stamped his boots on the porch until Caleb gave him a look that suggested the floorboards had suffered enough, and Mara guided Ben, the shaken assistant, into the chair nearest the stove. Eli brought water without being asked. Ranger resumed his station by the door, though he accepted one quick scratch from Ben with the grave patience of a retired professional allowing public admiration. Arthur watched his son enter, and Caleb saw the old man's face change in a way that hurt to witness. Relief first, then pride, then sorrow that pride had become rare enough to feel like a visitor. Preston removed his gloves slowly. His hands were not as steady as before. "Ben," he said, turning to the young man. "You did well getting clear." Ben blinked at him, surprised. "I slipped, sir." "You got clear," Preston repeated. It was not a lie, exactly. It was leadership attempting kindness with unfamiliar tools. Mara approved by not commenting. Caleb hung his parka by the stove and checked Ranger's paws for ice. One pad had a small crack, not serious, but enough to clean and balm later. Eli noticed and ran for the tin before Caleb asked. The boy knew Ranger's care kit better than the first aid shelf for humans. "He saved your camp," Eli said to Preston while handing Caleb the balm. "Ranger did." Preston looked at the dog. "Yes." "Dad helped too." "Yes." "And Mr. Wade did, and Miss Mara, and everyone listened when they were told to move back." Eli's voice had that careful quality children used when building a bridge plank by plank. "So it wasn't one hero thing. It was a listening thing." Caleb paused with Ranger's paw in his hand. Arthur closed his eyes, almost smiling. Mara looked at Eli as if the boy had just preached a homily in muddy socks. Preston absorbed the words with visible effort. "A listening thing," he repeated. "That is one way to say it." "It's the way Mom would say it," Eli replied, and the room grew gentle around the name. Preston looked toward Hannah's map still spread on the table. "Your mother made these." Eli nodded. "She said mountains talk in old marks, bent trees, broken branches, weird snow places where animals won't cross. She said maps are only polite if you let the land correct them." Wade leaned forward. "Your mom was smart." "She was also bossy." Eli glanced at Caleb. "In a loving, safety-oriented way." "Accurate," Caleb said. Preston moved toward the table. He did not sit this time. As a man claiming territory, he stood with both hands on the chairback, looking down at the survey. Hannah's winter notes, Arthur's journal, the photograph,
The coin. The layers of paper seemed to trouble him more now than before the camp incident. A flawed route was one problem. A living debt was another.
Together they formed a shape he could no longer reduce to sentiment. Wade took out his tablet and pulled up the company map.
Sir, if we pause south access, the northern Granite Spur option becomes relevant again. It was rejected for cost and schedule, not impossibility. Preston's jaw tightened at the word cost, but he did not interrupt. Progress. Wade continued tapping through files. Longer grade, more rockwork, additional environmental review near the drainage, but less exposure under the bowl. It avoids the Mercer parcel, almost entirely skirts the old service line, and gives us a better emergency turnaround near the ridge. Mara said, "So the expensive route is the safer route." Wade glanced at Preston. "Often true in mountains." Caleb looked at Preston. "Your people knew this option existed?" Preston kept his eyes on the tablet. "Many options exist in early planning. Companies narrow them. To the cheapest. To the feasible. Those are not always the same."
Preston looked up sharply, then stopped himself. He was still learning not to defend every wound as if it were a courtroom. Arthur coughed, and Mara immediately made him drink. The old man obeyed, then spoke when she allowed it. "When Preston was 12, he built a bridge over the creek behind our Ohio house. It was a magnificent little disaster, made from stolen boards, twine, and confidence. His mother told him it would not hold. I told him to test it with sacks of feed before crossing. He crossed anyway." Preston's eyes closed for half a second. "Dad, he fell in up to his chest," Arthur continued. "Came out blue with cold and furious at the creek for betraying him. His mother wrapped him in a quilt and said, 'The creek did not betray you, sweetheart. It only told the truth with water.'" Eli laughed softly. Preston did not, but his face changed. The boy in the creek was still somewhere in him, damp and angry and embarrassed. Arthur turned the challenge coin in his fingers. "I have watched you spend your life building bridges no creek was allowed to question. But mountains tell the truth too. Snow tells the truth, so do debts." Preston's voice was low. "And if I reroute what then investors accept a delay because my father tells a story, the county applauds because a map made by a dead rescue volunteer contradicts paid consultants, the bank forgets its lien because everyone in this cabin has suffered beautifully." Caleb heard the old armor returning, thinner, but still there. He understood it. Desperation often dressed as sarcasm because plain fear felt too naked. "No," Caleb said. "If you reroute, you do it because Wade recommends a winter hazard hold, because Mara documents the rescue access concerns, because Hannah's notes justify review, because Arthur's evidence tells you whose land this is in the story you are part of, whether you like it or not, and because buying the foreclosure out from under us after tonight would make you legally clean and publicly rotten." Preston's eyes narrowed. "There it is. There what is? The threat." Caleb shook his head. "The consequence," Mara said. "Different thing." Wade leaned back, studying Preston. "Sir, the public side is real. A veteran with a child, a rescue canine, a dead wife tied to a local rescue, an old doctor saved twice, a route with unreviewed winter concerns. Even if you won, you'd bleed goodwill all over the snow." Preston gave him a cool look. "That was colorful. I've been standing outside too long." Arthur's cane tapped once. "No one here wants your humiliation, Preston. That is generous of you to decide for them." Caleb answered before Arthur could. "I don't want your humiliation. I want my son to sleep in his room without wondering which rich man's signature can remove the walls. I want my wife's work respected. I want Owen's name left where it is. I want Ranger to die someday in a patch of sun by that stove, instead of in an apartment hallway because a corridor line looked clean. And I want you to look at your father and understand that the man you are trying to protect nearly died trying to protect you from becoming smaller." Preston stared at him. No one spoke. The words had not been loud, but they seemed to continue after Caleb finished, like the echo after a church bell. Eli moved closer to Ranger and buried one hand in the dog's ruff. Mara looked down. Wade looked at the map. Arthur's eyes shone, but he did not wipe them. Preston finally turned toward the window. Snow hid the camp the ridge, the line between what he owned and what he wanted. You think I am small. Caleb took a breath. I think you are afraid. Preston laughed without humor. Everyone has become a doctor tonight. Arthur said, No. A father. That one landed harder. Preston's shoulders lowered, as if he had set down something invisible for just 1 second. When Mom died, he said, and the room changed because he had not meant to begin. People kept saying she was in a better place. I was 12. I did not want her in a better place. I wanted her in the kitchen burning toast. I wanted her telling me my bridge was foolish. I wanted her angry at me for tracking mud on the stairs. Better place sounded like theft wrapped in church language. Mara's face softened with recognition, but she stayed silent. Preston touched the back of the chair. Dad left more after that. Or I remember it that way. Maybe grief edits unfairly. He went where people needed doctors. I stayed with ledgers, tutors, men who taught me that grief could be managed if money arrived on time. So I learned to make money arrive. I learned schedules, land rights, acquisition. I learned how to keep things from surprising me. He looked at Arthur. Then you disappeared into a blizzard with a backpack. Arthur whispered, I am sorry. I know. Preston's voice almost broke and he hated it. He pressed his lips together until the moment passed. I am angry because I was scared. That is not an apology, it is a fact. Facts are a start, Arthur said. Eli looked at Caleb and mouthed, kitchen meeting. Caleb gave the smallest nod. Preston returned to the table and picked up the photograph again. Owen Kessler. He said the name carefully. He had family. A mother in Maine, Caleb said. A sister in Oregon, no wife. He wanted one, though. He claimed he was too handsome to choose. Eli blinked. Was he? Caleb considered. He was confident. Arthur laughed once, soft and sad. He told me he had the face of a man who made soup better just by entering a room. Caleb could hear Owen saying it. For once, the memory did not arrive armed. Preston traced the edge of the photo. I cannot undo what happened. Nobody asked you to, Caleb said. I can call the bank. The sentence was so quiet that Eli did not understand at first. Caleb did. So did Mara, Wade, Arthur. Preston looked at the bank notice. I know the president at First Basin. I can purchase the lien tonight pending documentation or guarantee payoff by morning when systems open. That stops foreclosure. Caleb's pride rose instantly, foolish and wounded. I am not asking for charity. Preston looked at him. Good. I am not offering charity. I am settling a debt my family should have settled years ago, and I am protecting my project from becoming a moral and legal disgrace. Mara murmured, There he is, still making it a spreadsheet, but a better one. Eli smiled. Caleb did not. Not yet. And the route, Preston turned to Wade. Issue a full stop on South Access until winter hazard review. Prepare Granite Spur as the primary alternate. I want cost, schedule, permit, impacts, and emergency access benefits by tomorrow afternoon. Wade nodded. Yes, sir. And no one touches this parcel. Preston looked at Caleb. Not surveyors, not lawyers, not bank agents, not until I have reviewed everything. Caleb held his gaze. Reviewed is not enough. It is tonight. Preston was right, and Caleb disliked that. Storms did not make final paperwork easier. Men changed in steps when they changed at all. Arthur closed his eyes, exhausted by relief.
Mara moved to check him. Eli exhaled as if he had been holding his breath since breakfast. Ranger, sensing the room ease, picked up the sock he had gifted earlier and tried to leave with it. "No," Caleb said. Ranger froze, sock hanging from his mouth, the picture of innocence badly performed. Preston looked at the dog, then impossibly smiled. Not polished, not strategic, a real human mistake of a smile. It lasted only a second, but Eli saw it. "He steals left socks," the boy said. "Right socks judge him."
Preston's smile flickered again. Sensible. Outside, the storm continued, but the cabin had shifted. Nothing was solved. The bank still existed. The maps still needed review. Preston's investors had not yet begun shouting in speakerphone voices. Arthur still needed a doctor. Yet the line of fate had bent a little, and sometimes a little bend was the beginning of a pass through granite. Then the radio crackled on the counter, startling them all. A voice broke through clearer than before. "Whitcomb Field Team, be advised, Corporate Counsel is inbound by morning with County Enforcement Liaison, if Mercer parcel remains unsigned." The message repeated once, then dissolved into static. Preston's face hardened. Wade swore under his breath. Caleb looked at the radio, then at Preston. The first battle had been conscience. The next would wear a suit. Nobody in the cabin slept much that night, though. They took turns pretending for the comfort of one another. The storm continued its long sermon against the roof, and the radio stayed quiet after the corporate message, which somehow made it louder in everyone's mind. County Enforcement Liaison. Corporate Counsel. Inbound by morning. Words like that did not kick a door open, not at first. They arrived in clean vehicles, carrying folders and authority, and the calm belief that paperwork could make cruelty look procedural. Caleb had known men like that, in other uniforms, other languages, other rooms. Not evil, necessarily. Evil was rare and dramatic. More common were people who harmed by refusing to look at the full size of what they were doing. He sat at the table after midnight, with Hannah's maps spread before him, Ranger asleep across his boots, Eli curled on the bench under a blanket because he had refused the bed if all the grown-ups were going to do serious whispering without democratic oversight. Mara had told him democracy required sleep. Eli had answered that he was a benevolent watchdog state. Arthur had laughed until Mara threatened him with another medical lecture. Now the boy finally slept, one hand hanging down into Ranger's fur. Preston stood by the window phone raised uselessly, as if signal might return out of respect for expensive technology. Wade had gone back to the camp to secure equipment, then returned with printed survey copies, instant soup packets, and the news that several of Preston's executives were pressing to proceed before sentiment complicated the acquisition. Sentiment. Caleb looked at his son's sleeping face and felt the familiar cold anger. Mara sat across from him, marking Hannah's map with small removable flags. "The northern route here," she said softly, "passes near the old fire road. If they widen it, rescue access improves for 3 cabins and the campground." Wade nodded, rubbing his eyes. "It also gives us a staging area away from the bowl. More rock, yes, but less exposure under loaded slopes." Preston did not turn from the window. "More rock means more blasting, more months, more labor, new insurance language, possible investor revolt." "But fewer funerals," Mara said. The room went still. She did not apologize. That was another thing Caleb admired and feared about her. Mara knew when softness would only blur the truth. Preston lowered his phone. "I understand the point. I hope so. You think I don't because I calculate cost? I think you calculate cost because it makes you feel less helpless." Arthur opened his eyes from the chair. "She does that, doesn't she?" Caleb said. "Often." Preston gave a tired laugh, almost against his will. "Everyone in this cabin has taken a turn removing my skin." Mara's expression softened. "Then take a turn being more than armor." Preston looked away. Outside, the sky near the ridge flickered faintly with work lights as Wade's crew secured the camp. The amber glow made the snow look like ash for one uncomfortable second, and Caleb blinked until the image corrected itself. No ash. No desert road. Tahoe. Cabin. Sun breathing softly, ranger warm across his boots. He pressed thumb and forefinger to the bridge of his nose. Mara noticed, of course. She noticed everything inconvenient. "Caleb?" "I'm fine." "That sentence should be taxed," Eli mumbled from the bench, eyes still closed. "He says it when he is not." Caleb stared at him. Mara's mouth twitched. Benevolent watchdog state indeed. Arthur shifted under the quilt. "Mr. Mercer, may I see the place your wife marked? The ridge? Not tonight. Tomorrow, then. You are not walking up the ridge. I have a cane. You have lungs full of bad decisions." Arthur looked delighted by the insult. "I may write that down." Preston finally turned. "Why the ridge?" Arthur's face sobered. "Because I want you to see what a map does not show. I have seen the parcel. You have inspected it. That is not the same." Caleb understood before Arthur explained. Hannah's marker was on the low rise behind the cabin near the old Jeffrey pine, where she had once said the view made her feel like the whole lake was breathing. Owen's plate was in the shed, not on the ridge, but Caleb had also placed a small cairn of smooth stones near Hannah's tree. One stone for every man from the team who came home changed. One for Owen. One for the unnamed civilians who survived because others did not. He had never told Preston. He had barely told Eli. Some memorials were built because public ceremonies were too loud. "At first light," Arthur said, "before lawyers turn grief into a scheduling issue, take him there." Caleb looked at Preston. "Will you go?" Preston's eyes narrowed with reflexive suspicion. "To be emotionally ambushed. To look," Wade said. "Sir, the ridge also overlooks both proposed routes." Preston glared mildly at him. "You have become very helpful." "I contain layers." Eli opened one eye. "Mr. Wade is funny when tired." Wade pointed at him. "So are you, Map Captain." Caleb immediately looked at him. Wade winced. "Sorry, Map Kid." Eli grinned, apparently pleased. The word had slipped out harmlessly, but Caleb's look had done its work. Preston rubbed his forehead. "Fine, at first light, but if corporate counsel arrives before I have language to justify a hold, they will push through the foreclosure path." "You own the company," Caleb said. "I own enough to be blamed, not always enough to act alone without consequence." Preston met his eyes. "You think wealth means freedom. Sometimes it means you built a machine that grows teeth and expects feeding." Arthur's voice was sad. "Then stop feeding it people." No one answered. Dawn came slowly, blue and heavy, with the storm finally easing into a steady fall that no longer erased every shape. The pines emerged first, dark and bowed. Then the shed. Then the buried snowmobiles near the camp. Caleb made coffee strong enough to wake the dead and offend the living. Mara approved. Arthur insisted on standing, and Mara allowed it only after wrapping him in so many layers he looked like a dignified bundle of laundry. Preston tried to help him, but Arthur pointed old Moses at Caleb. "Him." Preston's face closed for a moment, then he stepped back. Caleb offered Arthur an arm. The old man took it. Eli carried Hannah's blue map box. Ranger moved ahead, breaking trail with the solemn importance of a dog who believed all expeditions existed because he permitted them. Wade brought his tablet. Mara carried the med bag and watched Arthur like a hawk with nursing credentials. They climbed the ridge behind the cabin in a slow line. The snow was deep enough to make every step a decision. Preston struggled in his impractical boots, though he did not complain. Eli stepped in Caleb's old tracks. Caleb noticed. He always noticed. Halfway up, Arthur had to stop breathing hard.
Preston moved toward him automatically. This time, Arthur accepted his hand. The small act did more to quiet the group than any speech could have. Father and son stood together in the snow, not reconciled, not repaired, but connected by pressure and pulse. At the top of the rise, the Jeffrey pine spread its dark arms over Hannah's marker. Caleb had carved it himself from cedar, sanding the edges until his fingers blistered because pain had seemed easier than sleep. Hannah Mercer, wife, mother, rescuer. She listened to the mountain and loved what it spared. Beside it, half buried in snow, sat the cairn of smooth stones. Eli brushed them clear with mittened hands. "Mom liked odd numbers," he said softly.
She said even numbers looked too organized to be trusted. Mara smiled with wet eyes. Preston stood a few steps back, suddenly aware that the parcel was not a parcel here. It was a room without walls. Arthur leaned on Caleb's arm. "Read it," he told Preston. Preston looked uncomfortable, which was perhaps the correct response. He stepped closer and read the marker. His gaze moved to the cairn. "These stones," Caleb answered after a moment. "People tied to the mission your father survived. People Hannah helped. People we couldn't keep. It grew." Eli added, "We don't put names on all of them because Dad says some families own their names private." Preston looked at Caleb, and something in his face softened with respect he did not know how to show gracefully. The valley below opened beneath them. From that height, the south corridor made a clean line, indeed clean, in the way a blade was clean. It would run from the camp, across Caleb's lower meadow, past the shed, below Hannah's ridge, through the training yard, and onward toward the bull. The northern granite spur route curved wider, climbing through darker timber and rock. Harder, longer, more honest to the land. Wade brought up the routes on his tablet and held it so Preston could compare them with the living terrain. "From here," Wade said, "you can see the wind loading under the bowl. See those cornice lines? Mrs. Mercer's map marks the same pattern. South route is efficient until it isn't." Mara pointed toward the fire road. "Northern route could tie into rescue access there." Eli opened the blue box and unfolded one of his own maps, colored pencil lines wandering but surprisingly clear. "And if they put the service turnout here, emergency trucks don't have to back down the hill. Mom hated roads where trucks had to reverse. She said backing up in snow is how adults invent new swear words." Wade nodded solemnly. "Your mother was a scholar." Preston took the child's map. He did not mock it. That mattered. He compared Eli's uneven drawing to Wade's tablet, then to the slope. Caleb watched him fight the machine inside his head. Cost, delay, investors, debt, father, photograph, dog, marker, snow. The machine still ran, but another sound had entered it. Maybe 3 taps on a floor, maybe a cane on a porch, maybe a boy's hand on a door. Arthur spoke quietly. 14 years ago, men came for me when I had become inconvenient to save. Your whole life after that has been built on borrowed time, Preston. So has mine. That does not mean we live crushed by debt. It means we choose carefully what we build on top of it." Preston did not look at him. His eyes stayed on the valley. "If I choose the northern route, the board will challenge me. Then let them," Arthur said. "If investors leave, the project may shrink. Then build something smaller and cleaner." Preston's mouth twisted. "You make ruin sound noble." Caleb said, "Not ruin, restraint." Mara added, "There is a difference." Preston looked at her. Of course there is, but there was less bite in it now. Below them, an engine sounded on the lower road. Everyone turned. Through the thinning snowfall, 3 black SUVs appeared near the gate, moving behind a county plow. Clean vehicles, authority. Folders, Caleb thought. Preston's jaw hardened. Wade lowered the tablet. Eli stepped closer to Caleb. Ranger's hackles lifted not from threat exactly, but from the tension moving through his people. Preston stared at the approaching convoy, then at the south route, then at Hannah's marker. Caleb could see the decision gather in him, still fragile, still contested. The machine with teeth had arrived to be fed. Preston folded Eli's map with unexpected care and handed it back. "We go down together," he said. Caleb asked, "To sign us out?" Preston looked toward the black SUVs. "To tell them the mountain has corrected the map." Then Arthur's knees dipped just slightly, and Caleb felt the old man's weight change against his arm. Mara moved fast. Preston turned all business gone. "Dad?" Arthur tried to answer, but the cold had taken the strength from his voice. Ranger tapped the snow 3 times, urgent and sharp, and the whole ridge seemed to hold its breath. Arthur did not fall. Caleb made sure of that, catching the change in weight before the old man's knees could betray him completely, the way a body trained by too many emergencies recognizes danger before thought has time to put on its boots. Mara was there a heartbeat later, one hand on Arthur's wrist, the other steadying his shoulder, speaking his name in a voice that was calm, because calm was a tool. Preston stood frozen for 1 second too long. It was not cowardice. It was the shock of seeing his father become suddenly small against the snow, the mighty inconvenience of age refusing to respect negotiation. Then he moved, dropping to one knee beside them, his polished boots sinking deep. "Dad, look at me." Arthur's eyes fluttered, annoyed more than afraid, which was a good sign in Caleb's private medical dictionary. "I am looking," he whispered. "You are blurry." Mara checked him quickly. "Cold exertion, fatigue. We need him back inside, now." "No speeches from anyone over 40 until he is warm," Wade muttered. "I am 52 and object." "Objection noted and frozen," Mara said. Caleb and Preston carried Arthur between them, not dramatically, not as a grand rescue, simply as 2 men doing the next necessary thing. Ranger walked ahead, breaking through the path they had already made, then stopping every few yards to look back. Eli carried the blue map box tight against his chest. He had gone pale, but not panicked. Caleb saw the effort in him and hated that his son had become good at effort. At the bottom of the hill, the black SUVs had reached the gate. 3 people stood beside them in long winter coats that looked prepared for a photograph of snow, not snow itself. One was a woman with a leather document case. Neat silver hair and a face arranged around professional disappointment. Another was a county officer in a heavy jacket, hands tucked under his arms against the cold, looking as if he had been promised a simple property matter and was now reconsidering all career choices. The third was a younger man, with a tablet already speaking into a phone that had found signal only because the lower road was kinder than the ridge. Preston saw them and his face changed again, armor assembling over fear. Caleb could almost hear each plate lock into place. Mara noticed too. "Do not turn into a conference room while holding your father," she said. Preston glanced at her. "I am aware of priorities. Good. Keep being aware." They got Arthur into the cabin, settled him by the stove, warmed him gradually and gave him fluids in careful sips. Mara checked his numbers and nodded, not satisfied but less alarmed. "He needs evacuation when weather permits, but he is with us." Preston exhaled so slowly it seemed to empty years from him. Eli stood near Ranger, twisting one mitten. Caleb crouched in front of him. "You did well." "I didn't do anything." "You carried the maps. You stayed steady. That is doing something." Eli looked toward Arthur. "I don't like when old people get quiet." "Me either. Is he going to be okay?" Caleb could not promise the future. He had learned that the hard way. "Mara says he is with us." Eli nodded. "That's doctor talk for maybe. It's honest talk for right now." On the porch, a knock came. Not 3 taps, 4 sharp raps from someone used to being answered by staff. Ranger looked personally offended. Preston straightened. "That will be Evelyn Cross, General Counsel." "She sounds expensive," Eli whispered.
Wade said. She is. Preston gave him a look. Wade shrugged. You know she is. Caleb opened the door because it was still his house. Evelyn Cross stood with snow on her shoulders and irritation in her eyes. Mr. Whitcomb, we have been trying to reach you. We need signatures before the county office closes remotely. The enforcement liaison is prepared to witness service if necessary.
Her gaze moved to Caleb. Mr. Mercer, I presume. You presume a lot for someone on my porch. Wade suddenly became fascinated by his boots. Evelyn's expression did not alter. I am here to resolve a property access obstruction that has already cost considerable time. Preston stepped into view behind Caleb. Evelyn, come in. Briefly. She entered, followed by the county officer, whose name badge read Nolan Price, and the young assistant who wisely stayed near the door. Mara stood by Arthur's chair with the posture of a gate. Eli and Ranger moved closer to Caleb. Evelyn surveyed the cabin in one sweep: maps, old man, boy dog, foreman, nurse, stove, poverty, resistance. Caleb saw the categories form and disliked her before she opened the case. Given the weather delay and the lean maturity, our recommendation remains unchanged, she said to Preston. We should proceed with acquisition through First Basin and offer relocation assistance. If Mr. Mercer refuses voluntary departure after foreclosure, we involve the appropriate channels. We can avoid spectacle if he signs the non-obstruction agreement today. County Officer Price cleared his throat. For the record, I am not here to remove anybody in a storm. I am here because your office requested a presence for documentation. Caleb looked at him. The man looked back, tired but decent. Good. Not everyone in a uniform wanted to be a hammer. Evelyn continued. The South Corridor is critical. Delay ending opens exposure on financing, permits labor, and vendor contracts. Sentiment cannot govern infrastructure. Preston looked at the table where Eli's colored map lay beside Wade's survey. Safety can. Evelyn paused. Safety has been assessed, Wade spoke from the bench. Not fully for winter loading. I am recommending an immediate hold in South Access pending review. Evelyn turned slowly. You are recommending that formally? Wade looked at Preston, then at Caleb, then at Hannah's map. Yes. On what basis observed conditions, local rescue mapping, field incident at camp, and a safer alternate route previously tabled due to cost? Evelyn's mouth tightened. That is inconvenient. Mountains rarely schedule convenience, Mara said. Evelyn looked at her as if searching for a label. And you are the woman monitoring the patient. Your client's timeline nearly turned into a memorial. Preston said, Mara. It was not a rebuke exactly, more a plea to keep the room from catching fire. Mara lifted both hands slightly and stepped back. Arthur opened his eyes. Let her speak. She uses fewer billable hours. Eli made a small sound into Ranger's fur. Evelyn ignored that. Mr. Whitcomb, even if we pause for review, that does not require abandoning acquisition. Owning the parcel preserves options. Caleb felt Eli tense. Preston saw it. That mattered. Once earlier he might have looked away. Now he did not. No, Preston said. Evelyn waited, perhaps because she had heard the word, but not the sentence behind it. No to which part? No to acquisition through foreclosure. No to service. No to non-obstruction under pressure. No one touches this house. Evelyn's professional mask thinned. Preston, you are emotionally compromised. Arthur gave a weak laugh. At last. Princeton looked at his father, then back at counsel. I am informed you are standing in a debtor's kitchen after a family emergency, surrounded by interested parties altering a major project based on a handwritten map and a story from 14 years ago, and a field incident, Wade said, and a foreman's formal recommendation, and a county safety review I can request, Officer Price added quietly. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged. If there is credible concern on winter access, I can flag it.
I don't enjoy paperwork, but I enjoy funerals less. The room went silent around that plain decency. Evelyn closed her case halfway,
then opened it again, recalibrating. If you pursue this, the board may require a vote. Then they will vote. Investors may withdraw. Then they will withdraw. You may be in breach of preliminary delivery representations. Then we will renegotiate or absorb penalties. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. That is not a strategy. Preston's voice steadied. It is a decision. Strategy comes after. Caleb watched him with something like surprise. The man was still costly, still polished, still more comfortable with consequences in columns, but the line had moved. Preston turned to Officer Price. Can you witness a statement of voluntary development hold and no displacement action pending review? Price nodded. I can witness that you said it. Legal effect depends on the paperwork, Evelyn said. Which I will draft if my client insists on setting money on fire. Use smaller flames, Arthur advised. Evelyn glanced at him, and despite herself almost smiled. It vanished fast. She removed a laptop from her case, then looked around. Is there power? Caleb pointed to the dead outlet. Cabin is emotionally rich, electrically poor. Eli whispered, Dad made a joke. Mara said, Mark the date. Wade produced a portable battery from his pack. I have one. Evelyn accepted it as if receiving tribute from a lesser kingdom. For the next hour, the cabin became the strangest office Caleb had ever seen. Evelyn drafted language at the table while Mara monitored Arthur. Wade dictated route hold terms, Officer Price witnessed names, and Preston paced in a 6-foot line near the stove until Ranger finally placed himself across the path and forced the millionaire to stop. Preston looked down. Ranger looked up. Neither moved. He does that when people are being annoying, Eli said. Efficient, Preston murmured and stepped around him. Caleb signed nothing that surrendered rights. Preston signed a development hold memorandum and a written commitment that Whitcomb Alpine would not pursue possession removal or site work on the Mercer parcel pending hazard review and lien resolution. Evelyn made clear the language was limited. Caleb made clear limited was not final. Preston then called First Basin Bank on a satellite phone Evelyn's assistant produced because, of course, corporate counsel traveled with better signal than hope. The bank president answered after enough transferred calls to prove money had its own weather system. Preston identified himself, requested immediate purchase or payoff of the Mercer lien, and listened. His face hardened. No, I am not asking for a courtesy. I am instructing payment from Whitcomb Alpine Emergency Discretionary Funds under my authority. Send escrow confirmation to Ms. Cross and Officer Price. Another pause. Because the alternative is you explaining why your institution attempted winter displacement of a veteran family during an active safety review after I offered guaranteed payoff. Caleb looked at Mara. She raised her eyebrows as if to say, there is the spreadsheet with a spine. Preston ended the call. They will process by morning. Will, Caleb said. Preston met his eyes. Will. Arthur's head rested back against the chair, tears slipping quietly into the lines of his face. Eli saw and brought him the sock Ranger had stolen, perhaps because it was the only comfort object currently available. Arthur accepted it with solemn gratitude. Thank you. It's clean-ish, Eli said. Outside the storm began to thin, at last, flakes falling slower through the porch light. Evelyn packed her laptop, still displeased but no longer triumphant. At the door she paused and looked at Caleb. For what it is worth, Mr. Mercer, most people sign. Most people have good reasons, and you— Caleb looked at Eli, Ranger, Arthur, Hannah's maps. Owen's photograph, the stove burning its careful fire. I had better ones not to. She nodded once, perhaps respect, perhaps only acknowledgement, and left. The SUVs retreated down the lower road with Officer Price, who promised to file the safety review note before his coffee got cold.
Wade went to inform the crew of the hold. Mara stretched her shoulders and whispered that she had not seen a lawyer blink that much since her aunt contested a will over a porcelain rooster. Caleb decided not to ask. Preston remained by the window watching the taillights fade. Arthur slept. Eli dozed against Ranger. For the first time in 2 days, the cabin felt less besieged. Then Preston's satellite phone rang. He answered, listened, and all the color left his face. Caleb stood. What? Preston looked toward his father. The hospital says the helicopter window may close again by afternoon. If we want Dad evacuated before the next band of weather,
We have to get him to Echo Meadow landing site within 2 hours. Mara was already reaching for her med bag. The road, Preston swallowed, blocked below the creek washout. Caleb looked at Ranger, then at the map of the old winter trail. A route existed, narrow and hard through timber and open snow, not for machines, not for pride. He tapped the table 3 times, thinking, "Then we walk him out." The sentence looked simple after Caleb said it, as if walking an old man to a helicopter through deep snow were no more complicated than carrying groceries from a truck. Nobody in the room believed that, but nobody wasted time arguing with the shape of necessity. Mara moved first, because Mara treated urgency like a kitchen drawer: open, find the right tool, close. She checked Arthur again, adjusted his layers, packed medication, water, thermal blankets, and the small monitor into the rescue pulk. Wade spread a map on the table and marked the creek washout, the blocked lower road, the old winter trail, and Echo Meadow, a flat clearing used by rescue crews when weather refused every better idea. Preston called the hospital flight coordinator and spoke in clipped phrases until Mara took the phone from him and translated the situation into medical language that made people listen. Eli stood by the stove, quiet in a way that worried Caleb more than questions would have. Ranger watched the boy, then watched Caleb, waiting for the pack order that had once meant work. He was old, but not as old as the storm hoped. Caleb pulled his Navy parka from the hook and checked the emergency gear. Headlamps, rope, flares, compass, snowshoes, extra gloves. The old habits came back cleanly, but this was not combat, and he refused to let his body lie to him. This was rescue. This was a family moving through weather. This was a boy watching the adults decide whether fear would be boss or witness. Preston came to Caleb's side while Mara helped Arthur sip broth. "Can he make it?" Caleb looked at Arthur, then the window where snow still fell in slow, heavy flakes. "With the pulk rests and no speeches, maybe." "Maybe is thin. It's what we have." Preston nodded, then looked toward Eli. "He should stay here with Wade's crew." Eli's head snapped up. "No," Caleb said. "Eli." "No, Dad. I know the old trail. Mom taught me the creek crossing." "Ranger listens to me if your hands are full. And if everyone leaves me here with strangers, I will be very calm until I am not, and then that becomes your problem." Wade coughed into his fist. Mara looked at the ceiling again. Preston seemed taken aback by the boy's legal presentation. Caleb knelt in front of Eli. "This will be hard. Everything is hard. Cold. It is winter. Scary." Eli's mouth tightened. "So is waiting." That ended the easy objections. Caleb searched his son's face and saw fear, yes, but also the same practical courage Hannah had carried into storms. The kind that did not enjoy danger, but refused to let loved ones enter it alone. "You stay between me and Mara. You do exactly what I say the first time. If I tell you to stop, you stop. If I tell you to look at me, you look at me. No jokes if breath matters." Eli considered. "Can I save one joke for morale?" Caleb almost smiled. "One." Rationed humor, understood. Preston watched them with an expression Caleb could not read. Perhaps envy. Perhaps grief. Perhaps the shock of seeing command built from love instead of fear. Arthur insisted on speaking before they moved him into the pulk. Mara told him he had 90 seconds. He used half.
Preston, he said, do not spend the walk apologizing. It wastes air. Walk! Preston took his father's hand. I can do both. You have never multitasked as well as you think. Eli whispered, he is feeling better. Caleb wrapped Arthur's hand warmer into place and secured the pulk straps gently, making sure nothing pressed wrong. Ranger sniffed Arthur from boots to hat, then licked his gloved fingers once. Arthur smiled. Good dog. Ranger accepted the promotion with dignity. They left the cabin just after late morning, the sky low and bright enough to hurt the eyes. Wade stayed behind to coordinate with the crew and keep the cabin heated up, promising Eli he would guard the blue map box. Like national treasure, but with fewer committees. Eli approved. The party moved in a line, Ranger ahead on a long lead, Caleb behind him pulling the front line of the pulk, Preston and Mara controlling the rear and sides. Eli tucked between Caleb and Mara with his small pack, Arthur bundled and quiet old Moses strapped beside him like a knight's lance, retired from battle. Snow swallowed sound. The cabin shrank behind them, its stovepipe smoke rising thin and faithful into the white air. Caleb did not look back often. Looking back invited doubt to walk faster. The old winter trail began behind the shed, skirted the training yard and entered the Jeffrey Pines where branches arched overhead under pillows of snow. Ranger picked the packed places by scent and memory. Once he paused, sniffed, and chose a line 3 feet left of where Caleb expected. Caleb trusted him. A moment later, his snowshoe broke through a crust where a hidden dip crossed the trail. Not deep, not dangerous if respected, but enough to remind everyone that the map was not the ground. Eli noticed. Ranger edited the route. Ranger edits many things, Caleb said. Mostly socks. The boy smiled, and that was worth the breath. Preston struggled more than he wanted to show. His boots had been replaced with spare winter boots from Wade, but he was not used to moving at the pace of Care. Care was slower than ambition. Care checked straps, watched faces, adjusted layers, stopped before collapse instead of after. Twice Mara called halts for Arthur, ignoring Preston's anxious questions until the old man's breathing settled. He is with us, she said each time, and Eli repeated it under his breath like a prayer with handles. At the first creek crossing, water moved dark beneath a crust of snow. Hannah had taught Eli to listen for hollow places, and he surprised Preston by pointing out the safer line before Caleb did. Mom said white over moving water has a different quiet, Eli explained. Preston looked at the creek, then at the boy. I never knew quiet had types. It has many, Eli said. Dad's quiet means check on him. Ranger's quiet means something smells interesting. Miss Mara's quiet means someone is about to be corrected. Mara said, correct. Preston glanced at Caleb. And mine. Eli thought about it with dangerous seriousness. Yours sounds like a door with a chair under the handle. Arthur, bundled in the pulk, wheezed a laugh. Preston looked wounded, then thoughtful. Fair. They crossed one at a time, Caleb setting the line, Ranger waiting on the far side, Mara guiding Eli's steps, Preston helping steady the pulk without trying to command the creek into obedience. Beyond the water the trail climbed, the pines thinned, wind reached them again, running cold fingers under hoods and cuffs. Caleb felt the old battle inside his body as the open slope widened ahead. Not now. He knew this sensation, the mind, trying to replace present snow with old dust, present effort with past loss. He stopped and made himself name 5 things. Ranger's tail, Eli's red hat, Mara's yellow jacket, Preston's uneven breath, Arthur's blanket edge fluttering. Tahoe? Not there. Here. Eli noticed anyway. The boy came close and tapped Caleb's sleeve 3 times. Caleb looked down. I'm here, Eli said. Caleb swallowed. I know. No, Dad. I mean, you're here. Mara looked away to give them privacy in a place without walls. Preston saw, and something in him shifted again. Perhaps he understood that some rescues were invisible to everyone except the person being pulled back. They moved on. Near the top of the low saddle, Ranger stopped abruptly and stood with one paw raised. Not the 3 taps, not yet. Caleb halted the line with a closed fist. The world went quiet, except for wind brushing snow across the crust. Ranger lowered his nose to move 10 feet to the right, then returned and tapped the snow 3 times. Mara froze. What is it? Caleb studied the slope ahead. It looked smooth, inviting, clean. Too clean. He crouched, brushed snow aside, and found a faint crack in the wind slab running like a pale seam toward the trees. He did not describe danger in dramatic terms. He did not need to. We go around, he said. Preston looked ahead, then at the longer line through thicker timber. How far? Far enough. Will we make the helicopter? We make it alive or not at all. Preston accepted that without argument. That mattered. The detour cost time. It cost strength. Arthur drifted in and out of sleep, waking once to ask if they had reached Ohio, then apologizing because he knew they had not. Eli gave him a peppermint from his pocket, the last one saved from Christmas. For navigation, he said.
Arthur let it melt on his tongue like sacrament. Excellent compass. The open meadow finally appeared through the trees, a flat white field bordered by pines with a rescue marker pole half buried near the center. Caleb checked his watch. They had 20 minutes before the helicopter's estimated window. The sky, however, was lowering again. Clouds moved over the ridge from the west, thick and gray. Preston's satellite phone crackled. He answered, then held it out so Mara could hear. She listened, face tightening. They cannot land in the meadow if visibility drops more, she said. They need a clearer marker and wind read. Caleb looked across the field. The marker pole was too low, the snow too flat, the light too diffuse. He had guided aircraft before, in places where mistakes cost more than pride, but he pushed that thought aside. This was rescue. Only rescue. He gave instructions Eli and Preston to the tree line, with Arthur and Mara out of the rotor wash zone if the helicopter made it. Ranger with Caleb until the signal was set. Flares only when told. Reflective blanket ready. Headlamps on steady, not waving wild. Preston did not argue. Eli did a little. Ranger should stay with Arthur. Ranger looked at Caleb, then Arthur, then the meadow torn between jobs. Caleb knelt and touched the dog's scarred ear. Work. The old command ran through Ranger like sunrise. He stood taller. Together, Caleb and Ranger moved into the meadow, snowshoes dragging, wind rising. Caleb set the reflective tarp, anchored it with poles, checked the smoke flare direction without lighting it yet, and listened. At first, there was only wind. Then, faint, beyond the ridge came the beat of rotors. Eli heard it and shouted, "I hear them!" Mara called back, "Save your breath!" The helicopter appeared as a dark speck through the gray, then vanished behind snow, then appeared again. Caleb raised the signal panel and gave the directions slowly. Deliberately, nothing frantic, nothing theatrical. The aircraft circled once, unable to commit. The wind shifted. Snow blew hard across the meadow. The pilot's voice came through Preston's phone, broken but clear enough. Visibility dropping. We may need to wave off. Preston looked at his father in the pulk, then at Caleb, standing in the white field, with Ranger braced beside him. His face showed helplessness, naked and terrible. Arthur's eyes opened. He seemed to hear enough. Walk, he whispered. Mara leaned close. What? No apologies, Arthur said. Walk. Caleb saw another option, risky only in effort, not in recklessness. The old fire lookout pad above the meadow, 50 yards higher,
more exposed to wind but clearer from the east approach if the pilot could circle. Hannah had marked it. Eli had drawn it. "Plan B," Caleb shouted. "Lookout pad." Mara stared at the slope. Preston said, "Can we get him there?" Caleb looked at Ranger. Ranger tapped the snow 3 times, then faced the climb as if the mountain had just become a door. The lookout pad was not far on a summer map, which meant almost nothing in winter. In snow, distance grew teeth. 50 yards uphill became a small country of breath rope weight wind, and decisions made one careful foot at a time. Caleb stood at the edge of Echo Meadow, with the rotor sound fading and returning through the clouds, and for one thin second his mind tried to go backward. He saw another extraction zone, another sky, another wounded hour when every delay seemed to ask for a name. Then Eli's voice cut through the white air. "Dad!" Not loud, not frightened into sharpness, just his son calling him back with the old faith of a child who had learned too early that love sometimes had to be repeated. Caleb turned. Eli stood beside Mara, red hat bright against the snow, one mitten on Arthur's pulk. Preston was at the rear line, face pale with cold and fear, no command left in him except the will to stay. Ranger faced the slope, ears forward, waiting. Caleb inhaled. 5 things. Eli's hat. Mara's yellow sleeve. Preston's hands on the rope. Arthur's blanket. Ranger's torn ear. "Here." He lifted one hand and made the old field signal for move. "Slow," he called. "No wasted steps. Mara sets medical pace. Preston rear brake. Eli left side by Mara. Ranger lead." Ranger moved first. Not charging, not heroic in the way movies lied about dogs, but steady. His nose swept the snow, testing crust and scent, finding the line where the slope held. Caleb took the front harness of the pulk. Preston took the rear rope with both hands. Mara walked beside Arthur, one hand checking him, one hand ready to steady the sled. Eli moved where told, small boots punching into the packed tracks Caleb made. The climb began. Snow dragged at the pulk runners. The slope was not steep enough to be dramatic, which made it worse in a way. It simply asked for work and kept asking. Caleb leaned forward and pulled. His thighs burned. His shoulders remembered heavier things. Preston slipped once caught himself and muttered an apology to no one in particular. "No apologies," Arthur whispered from the pulk, eyes closed. "Walk." Eli, despite himself, smiled. "He's really committed to that line," Mara said. "It is medically efficient." The rotor sound grew louder, then softened as the helicopter circled out of sight. Preston looked up too often. Caleb snapped, "Eyes on rope." Preston obeyed instantly, no pride. Good. Pride wasted oxygen. Halfway up, the wind shifted hard from the west, blowing loose snow across their path and flattening the world into moving white. Ranger stopped at once. Caleb halted the line. Mara crouched over Arthur, shielding his face. Eli turned his back to the gust, the way Hannah had taught him. Preston anchored the rear rope around his waist without being told, then dug his heels in. Wade's spare boots held better than his expensive ones would have. That small mercy felt almost comic. Ranger moved left, then right, searching. He tapped once, then paused. Caleb waited. The dog did not give the full signal. He was thinking if dogs could be said to think in words, perhaps he was reading the snow in a language older than speech. Finally, he angled toward a cluster of small pines bent by years of storms. Caleb followed, guiding the pulk around a shallow wind pocket. The detour added distance but steadied the line. Eli looked at the bent trees. "Mom called those prayer trees." Preston, breathing hard, asked, "Why?" "Because they kneel and keep growing." No one answered because the sentence did its own work. Near the top, Arthur woke more fully and tried to lift his head. "Preston." His voice was so faint the wind nearly stole it. Preston moved close without dropping the rope. I'm here. Your mother would have liked this boy. Preston looked at Eli. I know. She would have told you to listen sooner. Preston swallowed. I know that too. Arthur's mittened hand shifted beneath the blanket. Preston reached and held it for 3 steps awkwardly while still managing the rope. It slowed them. Caleb did not tell him to let go. Some things were worth time. The lookout pad appeared at last, a flat concrete rectangle half buried in snow, ringed by old posts from a fire tower long removed. It stood above the meadow with a clearer eastern approach, exactly as Hannah's map had promised. Caleb directed them to position Arthur behind the low windbreak formed by the old foundation wall. Mara checked him and gave Caleb one sharp nod. Still with them. Eli helped unfold the reflective blanket, hands clumsy in mittens but determined. Preston tried to help and fumbled the corner. Eli said, "No offense, but let me. I have more blanket experience." Preston released it. None taken. The helicopter returned closer this time, its sound rolling through the clouds like a drum under snow. Caleb took the signal panel and moved to the safe marking spot. He kept every gesture slow and clear, following the pilot's instructions through Preston's phone when the connection allowed. No wild waving, no panic. The aircraft circled once the downdraft lifting loose snow into a ghostly cloud that forced everyone to turn away. Ranger stayed low beside Caleb, trusting the command but hating the noise. The pilot's voice crackled. "Pad visible, wind marginal. We can set down light. Keep party clear." Mara and Preston moved Arthur back another few yards. Eli knelt beside Ranger because the dog had done his job and now needed someone small and beloved to hold him through the thunder. Caleb kept the panel steady until the helicopter settled, not gracefully, not like cinema, but with the cautious competence of people who knew mountains deserved humility. The crew moved quickly. They did not turn the moment into spectacle. They assessed Arthur, transferred him with care, listened to Mara's concise report, and loaded him. Preston climbed in after his father, then stopped and looked back at Caleb. Snow whipped between them, rotor noise stealing easy speech. Preston shouted, "Come with us!" Caleb shook his head. Eli, "Mara can bring him down." "No." Preston understood. Family first. He looked at Eli, then Ranger, then the white slope they had climbed together. "The lean will be cleared today." Caleb nodded. "The route—" Preston gripped the helicopter door frame. "North, Granite Spur. I will make it hold." "Make it honest." Preston's face changed, and for once there was no argument in it. "I will." Arthur lifted one hand from inside, barely visible through the open door. Eli raised his mitten high. Ranger barked once, not alarm, not command, simply farewell, in the only language he trusted. The helicopter rose into the gray and turned east, carrying Arthur and Preston toward the hospital, toward machines and warmth and whatever conversations waited when fear had less snow to hide behind. Caleb stood until it vanished. Mara came beside him. "He made it to the bird." "Yes. You made it too." Caleb glanced at her. "I'm standing here. That is not what I meant." He looked away because the sky was easier. Eli leaned into his side, Ranger pressing against both of them. For a minute they let the wind pass around them, then Caleb said, "We still have to get down." Eli sighed. "I was hoping for a sled situation." Mara pointed at the pulk, now empty. "Absolutely not." Eli brightened. "That means you considered it. It means I know your father would let you if I blinked." Caleb said, "I would not." Mara looked at him. "Locked door thing." Eli nodded solemnly. "He would." Despite the cold, despite the exhaustion, Caleb laughed. It came out rusty a sound, unused but recognizable. Ranger wagged hard enough to spray snow from his tail. The descent took longer than expected because tired legs do not respect downhill optimism. Caleb used the rope to belay Eli through the slicker sections.
Mara led part of the way, choosing the line with the same confidence she used in sick rooms. Ranger stayed between Caleb and Eli, occasionally turning to inspect the group with managerial disappointment. At the creek crossing, Eli stopped and listened, then pointed to the same safe line. "White over moving water has a different quiet," he said. Caleb nodded. "Your mom taught you well." "You too." The words were simple. Caleb felt them land deeper than praise. When the cabin came back into view, smoke still rose from the stovepipe. Wade stood on the porch, one hand raised. Behind him, the work camp lights were dimmed, machines idle, the valley strangely peaceful under the clearing sky. "Helicopter got out," Wade called. "Yes," Mara answered. Wade removed his cap for a second, then put it back on as if embarrassed by his own reverence. Inside the cabin felt enormous without Arthur in the chair. His pack remained by the table, lighter now because the photograph and journal lay out, but still present, still smelling faintly of wet canvas and old basements and things carried too long. Eli went to it and touched the top flap. "Do we keep it safe?" Caleb looked at Mara. "Until Preston comes back." "He'll come back?" Eli asked. Caleb thought of Preston in the helicopter, face stripped of polish, promising north and honest. "Yes. People promise things in emergencies." Mara removed her gloves. "True." Wade came in behind them. He already called. Caleb turned. "When?" 5 minutes ago by sat phone to camp. Told me to issue written shutdown of South Corridor, move all survey flags off your parcel and prepare Granite Spur crews. He also told me to send flour, coffee, canned food, and dry firewood to your porch. Caleb's pride prickled automatically. Wade saw it and raised one hand. He said to call it temporary field support for a safety consultant. Mara smiled. "He learns." Eli looked at Caleb. "Are you a safety consultant?" Caleb sighed. "Apparently. Do consultants get peaches?" Wade pointed toward the porch. "2 jars. Eli whispered, "Corporate is not all bad." Caleb shook his head, but the corner of his mouth betrayed him. As evening fell, the sky finally broke open in the west, revealing a strip of pale gold beneath the clouds. The snowfields turned blue, then rose, then silver. Wade's crew brought supplies without entering past a mat. A clean stack of firewood appeared by the door. A sack of flour, coffee beans, batteries, and the promised peaches lined the table. Caleb thanked them, because accepting help was also a discipline, and he was learning late, but learning. Mara made soup thick enough to count as a structural repair. Eli fed Ranger first, arguing that retired heroes with cracked paw pads deserved priority. Ranger agreed by eating before policy could change. After dinner, Caleb stepped onto the porch alone. The cold was gentler now. He could see the ridge where Hannah's marker stood hidden in trees, the meadow beyond the faint dark route toward Granite Spur. He heard the cabin behind him, Eli laughing at something Wade said, Mara washing a pot, Ranger's nails clicking on the floor. Not silence, not loneliness. A living house. He tapped the porch rail 3 times, not for danger, not for memory, but because he could. From inside, Eli tapped back on the window. Once, twice, 3 times. Caleb closed his eyes. Always, then the radio crackled behind him, and Wade called from the kitchen, voice suddenly tight. "Caleb, hospital just relayed a message. Arthur is stable, but Preston wants you on the morning call. He says the board is moving against the reroute tonight." The morning after the helicopter flight arrived clear enough to make the whole valley look newly made. Snow lay deep over every roof stump, stone, and wounded place, but the sky above South Lake Tahoe had turned a clean winter blue, and sunlight poured across Granite Bowl until the pines glittered like they were holding candles. Caleb woke in the kitchen chair with Ranger's head on his boot
and Eli asleep on the bench under Hannah's quilt. Mara had taken the short couch and somehow looked less rumpled than any person had a right to after hiking through a storm and bullying half a mountain into staying alive. Wade slept in his truck outside because he claimed he snored like a damaged chainsaw and did not wish to cause structural distress. The cabin smelled of real coffee. That alone made the morning feel suspiciously generous. Caleb stood carefully, trying not to wake Ranger. Ranger opened one eye, judged the attempt, and went back to sleep. Caleb fed the stove, then stepped onto the porch. A wall of firewood stood stacked near the door, cut to the right length. Someone had shoveled a path to the shed. On the table inside, beside Arthur's pack, lay a note from Wade, written on the back of a survey sheet. "Consultant supplies delivered. Do not argue before breakfast." Caleb read it twice, then folded it and set it near the coffee pot. Pride still stirred, but quieter now. Pride had kept him upright in hard seasons. It had also kept doors closed when help stood outside with soup and a flare gun. He was beginning to understand the difference between dignity and isolation, though understanding did not mean he liked the lesson. At 7:30, Preston called on the satellite phone Wade had left charging by the window. Caleb answered with Eli beside him, Mara at the stove, Ranger sitting alert, and Wade on speaker from the snowcat because he refused to miss the part where expensive people discover weather. Preston's voice came through, tired but steady. Arthur was stable at the hospital in Carson City, resting under observation, already irritating nurses by ranking broth quality. Eli whispered, "He's definitely okay." Preston heard and said, "He asked whether you still have his sock." Eli looked at Ranger. "Shared custody." Preston gave a soft laugh, then the call changed. Other voices joined: Evelyn Cross, 2 board members, an investor representative from Denver, and someone from risk management who sounded as if he had been born inside a policy manual. They expected Preston to present a temporary delay. Instead, he presented a decision. "Whitcomb Alpine Holdings is abandoning the South Access Corridor across the Mercer parcel," he said. "Effective immediately, planning shifts to the Granite Spur route. The Mercer lien is being paid in full through my discretionary authority recorded as settlement of a historical obligation and field safety mitigation. The parcel is not to be approached for acquisition again." Silence followed. It was not peaceful silence. It had teeth. Then the investor representative began speaking about cost overruns, fiduciary duty, and timeline exposure. Evelyn, to her credit, did not pretend surprise. She simply clarified the legal mechanics. The risk management voice asked about documented hazard concerns. Wade joined with formal language Caleb had not expected from a man who kept jerky in his glove box. Mara added a concise statement about rescue access and patient evacuation. Caleb spoke only when Preston asked him to describe Hannah's winter mapping and the old trail. He kept it plain, no performance, no appeal for pity. He spoke of terrain memory and the difference between efficient and safe. Eli listened with both hands around a mug of milk, proud and worried. When one board member suggested the company could still acquire the land respectfully while preserving markers, Preston cut him off. "No, you cannot preserve a home by removing the people who make it one." Caleb looked at the phone. Mara looked at Caleb. Eli's eyes widened because hearing someone learn out loud is a rare thing. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. It did not end with applause or a choir of changed hearts. Real decisions rarely did. It ended with grudging concessions, formal review, emergency authority upheld by council, and a scheduled board vote Preston was prepared to fight. When the call disconnected, the cabin remained quiet. Wade's voice came through one last time from the snowcat. "Well, that was almost fun, in the way dental work is almost a hobby." Eli said, "Mr. Wade, you need better hobbies." "Agreed." Preston stayed on the line after the others left. For a moment he did not speak. Caleb waited. "The bank confirmation is complete," Preston said at last. Evelyn is sending recorded release documents by courier as soon as roads open. The land will be yours, free and clear.
Eli's face changed slowly, as if hope had knocked, but he was afraid to open too fast. Free and clear, Caleb repeated. Yes. No repayment schedule hidden under a nicer word? Preston almost sounded offended. No, Mara murmured. Growth. Preston ignored her, though Caleb suspected he was smiling. I also want to hire you officially as winter safety consultant for the revised route. Paid. With boundaries you set. If you refuse, Wade will become unbearable. Wade's voice crackled in from the snowcat. Already there. Caleb looked at Hannah's maps. I will review it. That is not a no. Don't get excited. I rarely do, Preston said, and this time the dryness held warmth. Eli leaned toward the phone. Mr. Preston. Yes, Eli. If the new route has a turnout where Mom marked it, emergency trucks won't have to reverse, then it will have a turnout. And a sign telling drivers to listen to the mountain, Preston paused. I can promise a sign about winter safety. Eli considered the compromise. Acceptable. The call ended with Arthur insisting weakly from the hospital bed that everyone stop making decisions without soup. 3 days later, when the roads opened and the hospital discharged Arthur with strict instructions he intended to interpret creatively, Preston drove him back to the cabin himself. Not in a convoy, not with lawyers. Just one dark SUV with proper winter tires and a back seat full of things Arthur had demanded his pack: flowers for Hannah's marker, a book on local birds for Eli, and a box of left socks he claimed were for Ranger's professional development. Ranger accepted the box with immediate interest. Caleb stood on the porch as Preston helped Arthur up the shoveled path. The old man looked thinner, but his eyes were clear. He carried old Moses in one hand. Preston carried the big canvas backpack this time. The sight of that reversed burden did something quiet to Caleb. Arthur paused at the top step and looked at the door, the porch rail, the stove smoke, the boy bouncing in place beside Ranger. Still standing, he said. So are you, Caleb replied. With supervision, Mara stepped out behind Caleb. Strict supervision. Arthur kissed her hand gallantly and was told not to flirt with medical staff until cleared by a physician. Eli presented him with the sock, washed and folded. Arthur bowed as if receiving a medal. Preston then handed Caleb a thick envelope. Recorded release, paid in full. Evelyn included 6 copies because she distrusts the universe. Caleb opened it. The words were legal and dry, but their meaning was warm enough to heat the porch. First Basin Bank had released a lien. No foreclosure, no hidden transfer, no clean sentence waiting to steal the house. Caleb read it once, then again, because a man who had lived under a countdown needed time to believe the clock had stopped. Eli watched his face. Dad, Caleb handed him the envelope. It's ours. Eli did not cheer. He stepped forward and wrapped both arms around Caleb's waist with sudden force. Caleb bent over him, one hand on the boy's back, the other gripping the papers. Ranger pressed in from the side because no family emotion was official until stamped with fur. Mara looked away, pretending interest in the woodpile. Preston watched, and the look on his face was not envy now, it was instruction. He was learning what could not be bought, only protected. Spring came late that year, but it came. Snow pulled back from the meadow in ragged sheets. The creek spoke louder each week. Green returned first in small, brave places near stones, then everywhere at once, as if the valley had been holding its breath and finally trusted the air. Whitcomb Alpine crews moved north to Granite Spur. The work was slower, louder, and more expensive than Preston's first plan, but it was also safer. Wade oversaw the grade, with Caleb consulting on winter access and Mara reviewing emergency points when she had time. Eli's turnout made it onto the final plan. Officially, it was called Emergency Service Pullout 3. Unofficially, Every crew member called it Eli's common sense corner, which pleased him so deeply he pretended to dislike it. Preston visited often, sometimes for work, sometimes to bring Arthur, sometimes with no convincing excuse at all. He remained Preston precise, impatient, still capable of making a grocery list sound like a merger. But he listened more. He asked Wade questions before answering them himself. He walked the ridge with Arthur every few weeks, not to perform grief, but to practice presence. At Hannah's marker, he left flowers the first time and said nothing. At Owen's plate in the shed, he placed the challenge coin in a small glass case Caleb built from scrap pine. "It belongs here," Arthur said. Caleb looked at the coin, at the photograph, at Ranger sitting beneath the workbench with a stolen sock. "Yes," he said, "it does." By early June, the Granite Spur route was ready for its first utility run. Preston invited Caleb, Eli, Mara, Arthur, Wade, and half the rescue crew to the overlook where the new road curved around the rock instead of through the Mercer land. There was no ribbon cutting because Caleb refused to stand near scissors for a ceremony about restraint. Wade called that reasonable and also cowardly. Mara brought coffee. Eli brought his map box. Ranger wore a clean red bandana and looked offended by fashion. Preston unveiled a bronze plaque mounted into the stone near the overlook. It read Kessler Whitcomb Pass, built in honor of those who came through storm and fire to carry strangers home, and in gratitude to the mountain that corrected the map. Caleb read it twice. Owen's name in bronze under open sky. Arthur stood beside Preston, one hand on his cane, one hand on his son's arm. Mara slipped her hand into Caleb's, not dramatically, not as a declaration demanding a witness, simply there. Caleb let his fingers close around hers. Eli saw and smiled into Ranger's fur with the unbearable discretion of a 10-year-old who planned to mention it later at the worst possible time. The first vehicle moved along the new route slowly, a maintenance snowcat fitted for summer work, its engine echoing against the granite. It curved north away from the cabin, away from Hannah's Ridge, away from the training yard where Ranger would spend warm afternoons pretending not to nap. The valley below remained whole. Caleb could see the porch, the smoke from the stove, the path to the shed, the meadow where Eli's boots had made 1,000 tracks. He could see, not with his eyes, but with the quieter part of himself, the night Arthur arrived, bent under that enormous pack, cane tapping 3 times on the porch boards. He could see Ranger's paw answering. He could see Eli's hand tapping his shoulder in the snow, calling him home to the present. Preston stepped beside him. "Is it enough?" Caleb looked at the past, the plaque, the land spared, not by luck, but by a series of hard choices made in time. Enough for what? For the debt. Caleb thought about that. Debts of money could be cleared by envelopes and signatures. Debts of life were different. They were not paid once. They were lived forward, passed from hand to hand, made lighter by use. He looked at Preston, who had carried his father's pack back up the porch steps, and learned slowly not to mistake control for love. "It is a good start," Caleb said. Preston nodded. "I can live with that." Arthur, who had been pretending not to listen, said, "See that you do." Everyone laughed, even Preston. That evening, back at the cabin, Caleb placed the bank release in Hannah's blue map box, not hidden under flour or fear, but kept with the things that had saved them. Eli put the first jar of peaches on the table and declared it a holiday of unspecified origin. Mara made biscuits. Wade arrived with coffee and a story no one fully believed. Arthur sat by the stove, his huge backpack finally empty, old Moses leaning against the chair. Preston helped wash dishes, badly but earnestly. Ranger stole one left sock from the new box and carried it to Caleb with the pride of a creature maintaining sacred tradition. Outside, the porch rail caught the last gold of sunset. Caleb stepped out for a moment and looked over the valley. The air smelled of pine thawing earth and wood smoke. Behind him, Eli tapped on the window 3 times. Caleb turned and tapped the rail 3 times back.
Not a warning now, not a distress call, a family signal. I am here. Are you here? Always. The valley answered with quiet, and this time quiet sounded like peace. Sometimes grace does not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes as 3 small taps on a door, a tired hand asking for shelter, a child brave enough to tell the truth, or an old dog who still knows when someone needs saving. This story reminds us that a home is more than walls, and a debt of kindness is never truly paid by money alone. We pay it forward by listening, by choosing mercy when power would be easier, and by protecting the people and memories God has placed in our care. If this story touched your heart, write Amen in the comments and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. May your home be warm, your burdens shared, and your heart open when grace knocks softly.